IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Happy Friday, everybody. It is Friday, February 21st. And with it being Friday, you guys know what that means. It is the Friday Free-For-All Mailbag, where this is our opportunity to let you guys dictate the direction of the conversation. So if you have a question, you have a thought that you want us to comment on, go ahead and put it into the chat. This isn't specific to the Premium Message Boards members. This is just for all of the listeners that tune in to us every time that we go live. And it's our way to say thank you. And we appreciate everybody for all the tuning in, all the attention, all the support. So if you want to submit a question or you want to submit a comment, be sure to put MB for mailbag, or you put a little mailbox emoji. All super chats get bumped to the top. And we're going to keep rolling through until we either get through all the questions or time runs out. We're going to see how this goes. But it's Friday, man. I'm in a good mood. The sun's finally out. I think it's, well, when I mean it's getting warmer, I just mean down here in Indianapolis, the real feel is no longer going to be 6 degrees. So I guess it's getting warmer, I suppose. But it's not too bad. Not too bad. Brian, it's Friday. How are we feeling?
I'm feeling great, man. I'm ready for a mailbag, and I really enjoyed yesterday's show. I just really enjoyed that. I was talking to Sean Davis earlier, and we were having a conversation about what he and I are going to discuss in the Monday RTCF show and how that tied into that. And just, it was really fun. And I enjoyed it, talking about the CFB playoff stuff and just kind of how that's going. And then great questions in the mailbag. And then, of course, you ended yesterday's mini mailbag with a great submission, great conversation starter. And so I'm like, man, what are people going to come up with today? And so we want you guys to get those questions out there, put an MB on there or a mailbag emoji, so we know that it's in there. But man, I got to tell you, Trev, I'm pretty fired up for today's show. I really am. And I always love talking football in the off season. It's because it's that great time of the unknown. You don't really know. You get to kind of put your name out there, your neck out there a little bit. And here's what I'm predicting. And here's what I think's going to happen. And here's what we're going to see, and what am I going to be right about, what am I going to be wrong about, and that's what's so much fun about this time of the offseason. You start to study your opponents a little bit more. You and I were talking a little bit about Pitt and, how their season ended, and it's just a lot, man. I just love this time of year. I really do. It sucks because there's no football on, but, man, you and I are always watching football, whether it's replaying a game from TV broadcast, watching the All-22. It's I never have football not to watch, but I always enjoy this time of the year, and, of course, the Friday mailbags are always a blast. If you want to get something moved to the top of the list, obviously put a super chat in there. Tyler Evans gets things kicked off. Some of these, I think Tyler purposely does some of these super chats, like things that he doesn't think we're going to have an answer for, or he likes to see us squirm. But we'll get started with him. But I'm looking forward to today, man. Very much looking forward to today.
I'm always ready. I love mailbags. I've scrolled through. We've started a lot of them. All the questions that have been coming in, we have some good submissions today, so it's going to lead into some really, really fun conversations, as always. So, Ryan, without further ado, I think it's time to get the mailbag started here, my man. So I know that we have a couple super chats in here from Tyler Evans. All right, Tyler. Thank you so much for the super chat. But when you watch film on a quarterback, what do you like to see, and what are the red flags that you don't like?
Well, obviously, the first thing you look at, there's when you study a quarterback on film, there's different levels to it, different layers to it. And I've always felt that what works for me is you look at them separately, meaning I don't try to evaluate the intangibles while I'm evaluating the physical tools. You can't help but evaluate a decision when you're watching a quarterback play. But when I first watch, I got my checklist of different things I'm going down, physical traits, okay, height, weight, frame, arm speed, throwing motion mechanics, footwork mechanics, foot quickness and agility, because a guy can have bad footwork, but if he's got good agility and good foot quickness, I can teach him to have good footwork. I'll fix that. That's no problem at all. If a guy's got a slow throwing motion or a fast throwing motion, and then you start looking at it from, does he use his core when he throws? A lot of the physical, how does the ball come out of his hand? That means several things. Number one is, does it come out with velocity or not? Does it come out with a lot of tight revolutions or not? Does it come out the nose up, the nose down, the nose level? Does he dip his shoulder when he throws deep too much? Does he not dip it enough? What's his follow through like? How does he throw when in an imperfect backfield, pocket? Excuse me. That's an important thing. A lot of quarterbacks look great when they can hit the top of their step, gather, plant, throw. Looks great. It's why you see those guys, Trev, that are great 7-on-7 quarterbacks, but then you put a pass rush in front of them and they're not the same guy. And so those are all like the physical traits that I look for. Then I'll watch through the film again, same film, and I'll start looking at it from more of a decision-making standpoint, a timing standpoint, a ball placement standpoint, an accuracy standpoint. So more of the result of the physical tools. So I'll look at the physical tools, and then I'll look at the result of the physical tools. Okay, guy, like here's one. Mark Sanchez is a guy that I remember evaluating coming out of high school at USC, right? Obviously, he was a big-time player. And I remember watching Mark Sanchez, and I'm thinking, like, this guy's got really good fundamentals. He's got really good footwork, really good throwing motion, really clean mechanics, really good this. But and you watch, like, boy, he's a really well-coached quarterback. Then you look at him play, and you're like, but he doesn't have great ball placement. He's not a real accurate quarterback. From like when you think of a guy like him, you think of like a Jimmy Clausen. Where, Jimmy was just a maestro out there. He could put that ball wherever the heck he wanted to put that ball, and when you think of a guy like with great mechanics, you think of a guy that has that. And then you look at Mark Sanchez and he wasn't great with ball. He wasn't super accurate. His ball placement wasn't great. He got good velocity on it. Didn't have a cannon, but had good velocity on it. And then you'd look at his decision-making. His timing wasn't always great. He wasn't a great decision maker. And there were just things that you're like, boy, you really like this part of it. But then as you dig deeper, you're like, there could be some problems here that you worry about. And that kind of gets you into the red flag thing. A lot of the red flags really come down to physical issues. Hey, I love this guy, but he's 5'9". I run an under center pro style offense. Can't be. Right. If I'm coaching Oklahoma's air raid offense, I can live with a 5'9", 5'10" guy if he's got Kyler Murray's skill set. I mean, so there's different things that could be. A guy that's got a really troubled injury history. This guy's hurt his throwing shoulder twice, or this guy's tore both of his ACLs already in high school, or this guy's missed this game and he misses games all the time. And there's things like that can be red flags. You talk to people around him and you kind of get a sense of his character, his leadership. What kind of person is he? One of the things that I would do when I was recruiting a quarterback, and this is again at a different level, but I would do the same thing if I was at Notre Dame or any other Power 5 or school or FBS school, is when I go do an in-school visit, I always got there early and I would go talk to the guidance counselor. I'd try to bump into, if there's anybody in the cafeteria, I'd say, hey, look, does anybody in there teach this kid? Is there any chance I could speak with with one of his, teachers or something like that? You go talk to them. What kind of student is he? How does he do this? And you can tell when you're being snowballed, and you can tell when people are, not being honest with you. And then you can tell sometimes too, when it's like, well, I'm trying to tell you the truth, but I don't want to completely bash the kid, and then you can tell, like, boy, this kid, you hear the same things over and over again. I've heard people say, like, I'll talk to the janitors. And I'm like, I never went there, but like, I get the point behind it. Is you're trying to see how does he treat people that he doesn't have to treat well. I mean, I'm like, look, a guy could be a bit of a jerk and still be a great quarterback, so like how he treats the janitor, that matters more to me if I was hiring him to be my youth pastor than it would be if I was hiring him to be my quarterback, and you'd like to have both, but it's not a prerequisite. But I do care that he doesn't really care about paying attention in the classroom, and he doesn't really have a good attitude. He talks back. He doesn't take teaching well, or he does. Those are things that you look at. Other red flags are certain things where you talk to a guy and you start talking about the game, and you see a guy that just doesn't process information really well as you talk about it. Like, hey man, what were you? Man, this is a great throw. What were you there? And he starts explaining it to you, and you're like, yeah, I just. That's the read. We drop back and we're throwing the post there. All right. Well, what if the guy did this? Well, we're just supposed to throw the post. Okay, but what if? And it's like and you can just tell, like, this guy doesn't really have a real great understanding of the offense. It's like, well, hey, here's why we threw the post. We were running cover 2, we're running double post into cover 2, and We're not supposed to be able to hit that over the top post. It's really an ISO. We're going to high-low that field side safety, and we're going to try to occupy the backside safety with a smash, a boost corner route or a burst corner. Try to really impact it with that, so we can isolate that and maybe hit that underneath post route. But when we're playing them, this guy was flat footing that when he would see vertical release by number 2, he'd flat foot. And so even though we didn't think the outside post would be there, once I saw him flat foot, I knew that if we got a clean release outside, I could really get that ball over. That's a guy that understands how to read a dang defense, because you can ask him about it and he can talk you through it. Well, what if he would have done this? Oh, well, yeah. I mean, or it's like, well, if he'd have done this, then I probably would have taken that inside, that underneath post, because of the way he would have, impacted the route. And if that wasn't there, I'm going to my check down because, against cover 2, that burst corner doesn't have anything to isolate the backside corner, so we don't have anything there. He's going to be underneath that. That's just more of a impact the backside safety route. So if we don't get that high-low on the double post, then I'm coming down to my back out of the backfield, or, I'm going to look for a crease to kind of run the ball. And, those are things that you look for, and how a guy can explain to you why he did certain things. And then you ask him, well, what about this? What if this would have happened? How well he responds to those things tells you, like, this guy processes really well, because I can see it on film. And sometimes you'll have a guy that comes from a great high school system, and you realize, like, the coach puts him in a really good position, but he's not necessarily the reason for it. You learn those things. So guys that don't process well, guys that don't handle adversity well. I love watching quarterbacks live in real games, because you can see how they act in between series. And this is a lesson I learned. I can't remember who it was. I don't remember if it was Dan Mullen or one of my early coaches. Might have been Scott Isfording. I'm trying to remember who it was, but I had somebody tell me very early on, he's like, the best way to evaluate quarterbacks. I never thought about this. I just got done playing quarterback, and I was getting into my coaching career, and said, look, you want to watch a quarterback play live. I'm like, okay, why? And he goes, well, you can see all the traits on film. I don't need to watch a kid live to know that the ball explodes out of his hand. I can see that on film. I don't need to see that he throws the great. I said, but what I don't see on a highlight film is, how does he interact in between plays? How does he treat? I know what happens when he gets sacked, then the film ends, and the next time it's there, they're walking line of scrimmage. How does he act when he gets sacked in a game? Is he getting in his lineman's face all the time? Whenever a receiver does something wrong, is he showing the guy up? Is he throwing his hands up in the air and getting all mad? Or does he go right to that guy and say, hey, listen, there's no problem getting upset with a receiver, but there better be some sort of instruction coming along there, like a coach, like, hey, man, like, you need to do this, you need to do that. Then you go over and you rip him a little bit, and then you pat him on the butt on the sideline, or pat him on the head on the sideline. You're like, man, I got you, man. I'm going to come right back to you. And then I know he came back to him on that next series. What happens when he gets sacked? Does he just go to the sideline and berate the offensive line? What's his body language like? Does he hang out with the lineman? What is he doing when the defense is on the field? Is he engaged? Is he down there goofing off with his buddies, or is he down there with the position coach? Is he down with the lineman? Are they talking through things? Those are all things that you look for, and how some of those things go can be red flags for you. And just say, like, look, yeah, this guy's got a million, tools, but I don't think he has those intangibles you look for to really be a great quarterback. Or hey, I know I need to work on this. If I don't address this, we're going to take the kid because he throws the ball like he's the $1 million man. But I need to know that I've got to address these flaws if he's ever going to be the guy for us, or if he's going to be a good teammate. And then sometimes you got to pull the plug and say, this guy's a terrible teammate. His teammates don't like him. They don't want to play for him. He's not coachable. That's not a guy that we're going to bring in. Yeah, he throws it. He throws it. He's got $1 million arm, but he would be a bad locker room presence for us. Those are all things that you look for as potential red flags beyond just any. Because like a guy not being talented, it's not a red flag. That's just an evaluation. Guy can't throw the ball beyond 35 yards. That's not a red flag. That's an evaluation. I'm not going to take that guy. He's not good enough. Red flags to me are more things related to how you play the position from a mental standpoint, how you handle adversity, and your character. And then the only other red flag that's a physical thing is just the injury history or the frame. Like, this guy's a $155 soaking wet. And you look at him and you see him in the weight room, and he's like, his shoulders are super narrow. He's bony. Like, this kid's not going to put on weight. You meet his dad, and his dad's built the exact same way. You're like, that's what this kid's going to look like. You meet his dad, and his dad's like 225, and he's like, okay, yeah, I was that way in high school too, and now look at me. all right, cool. We'll work with that. We'll take that chance. Those are all things that I look at when I'm evaluating, watching film on a quarterback. But a true evaluation of a quarterback has to go beyond just the film part, and that's what the other stuff is. So I hope that answers your question, Tyler.
Fair enough. I learned some stuff. I've never recruited a quarterback, so that was
Yes,
fun
you
for me
have.
to learn about.
Yes,
Recruited
you have.
A quarterback?
Yes, I recruited one last night. I 14 5-stars last night when I finished my season. I couldn't sleep last night, so I finished up my season 2025 of NCAA, and I signed 14 5-star players. So don't tell me you've never recruited a quarterback.
Fair enough.
Trevor's like, "What are you talking about, man?"
I was sitting there thinking, I was like, I don't think I have. I was like, oh God, did I tell him I did? I was like,
you told me when I interviewed you that no. You're good, man. You're good.
Oh, that's funny.
Got another super chat from Tyler Evans.
Thank you for the super chat, Tyler. Give me your top 5 quarterbacks with the ugliest throwing motion. Oh gosh,
Phillip Rivers is definitely in that conversation. He has a very ugly throwing motion, but it is it gets the job done. I'm trying to think. I'm actually going to look this up because I can't even think of. I'm trying to think of some, like, I'm looking at some of the all-time great quarterbacks and thinking of anybody that might have an ugly throwing motion.
Tim Tebow's watch a lot of throwing motion wasn't great.
Oh yeah, Tim Tebow. It was super long. He would drop it down. He had a bit of an ugly throwing motion. This is gonna come across as like sacrilege a little bit. I didn't think Brady Quinn had the super prettiest throwing motion in the world. I'm going to be honest with you. It was very effective, but it wasn't always pretty. It wasn't always pretty. Trying to think.
Depending on what you like, I've seen some people really not like Peyton Manning's. I mean, he's one of the greatest quarterbacks who's played, but it's the super high release. I know some people don't really like.
Yeah. As far as pretty or not pretty, his release doesn't bother me. What bothered me was he looked so awkward, like in the pocket. He looked really awkward in the pocket. That would be a bit more of a thing for me than the release. Danny Warfel, I thought, had a really ugly throwing motion. Like it was like here, and it was like, real compact, and just I thought he had a bit of an ugly throwing motion as well. Trying to think of some others. There's been a few guys that had a really ugly throw. I mean, of good quarterbacks, because this says top 5 quarterback with the ugliest throwing motions. Like there's been some guys that are like really bad quarterbacks that have really bad throwing motions, but thinking of the guys that were good. So we talked about Tebow. We talked about Brady Quinn. We talked about. I've heard people say that they don't think Eli Manning they think he has a. I don't have any issue with his throwing motion. It doesn't bother me at all.
No.
I thought Jim McMahon had a really funky throwing motion for the Bears. He had a funky. He's another guy with a really long throwing motion. But it was if Jim McMahon was healthy, he would have had a much different NFL career. Like he was a great talent.
I thought
a bit nuts, but great talent.
I thought Chad Henne's at Michigan's was really bad. Like the sidearm, like the complete sidearm was really weird.
Yeah. I have to refresh my memory on that one a little bit. Let me look up. Let me pull.
Because he was a guy where, like, there's some quarterbacks like the Matt Staffords of the world that can change their arm angle. Like that's just kind of how he threw. Like it was very off to the side.
Yeah, I'm looking at some old highlights of him right now. I thought Brian Greasy had a funky throwing motion. It was funky. He would carry it low and then do like this. Yeah, he had a bit of a funky throwing motion. Looking at it now. That was a little funky. He was a very underrated Michigan quarterback.
He was.
So he was a good quarterback in Michigan. That's a bit of a funky motion. Michigan's had a couple guys with funky motions. Let me look up Elvis Gerbach because I think I remember Elvis Gerbach having a bit of a funky throwing motion too, but I could be wrong on that. A lot of those really tall guys can sometimes have really funky throwing motions. Because their arms are so long. No, it wasn't Gerbach. Who was the other tall guy they had back then? What year? What years did Elvis Gerbach? They had a John Navarre. That's who it was. Hold on a second. It wasn't Gerbach. Let me see. John Navarre. I believe he had a really funky throwing motion, if I remember correctly. I remember there was a tall Michigan quarterback that had a real funky motion, but it wasn't. I looked at Elvis Gerbach. This was pretty clean. Of course, you get these stupid ads. But hey, it's how you pay the bills, right? Let's see here. Oh, Lord, have mercy. But I think John Navarre is the guy that I'm remembering correctly, and I'm getting ready to pull up his highlights now. But I believe he's another guy that had a really funky throwing motion. A big, tall, long, really awkward guy, funky body type. But like I said, some of those guys, like sometimes you have to have a bit of a, yeah, he had a funky throwing motion. Yeah, that's who I was thinking of. It was John Navarre, not Elvis Gerbach. But Michigan's had a couple guys. It was like a shot put. He was like a 6'6" guy that was like had a shot put. It was very weird because normally 6'6" guys are like they have the Trevor Lawrence problem where they're so long limbed that their trigger is just it has to necessarily be longer because it's hard for a big tall guy to get here. Like Danny Wolf was like he did that. Steve Spurrier, like all his quarterbacks had the same exact motion. You carry the ball here, and like Shane Matthews had a bit of a, but Danny was like shot put. And John Navarre's was a lot like that, but you don't expect that from a guy that's like 6'6". You expect him to have a little bit, longer trigger, and he did not. So he would be my other one. Yeah, he'd be my other one. Thank you for that, Tyler. That's an interesting one.
Got a super chat from Walk On Carry Off. Thank you so much for the super chat. From your experience, describe the post-game grading process. Who grades? Who reviews? How might it be done at Notre Dame?
Well, I mean, I did all the grading and reviewing for IB. We all do our own kind of evaluation of it, but as a coach, you do it two ways. One is you individually watch your position group. You grade each play based on whatever criteria that you did. The way I did it was more of just kind of it's how I grade it now, Trev. It's how I grade Notre Dame players now. I did an offensive line breakdown from the spring game, and basically you get a plus or a minus. You either did your job or you didn't do your job. Not doing your job could be you didn't fundamentally do it the way you're supposed to. Even if it was effective, your technique, your footwork is bad, and I'm not going to praise you for getting the job done against an inferior player just because you got the job done. Because when you go play, like, okay, you're playing a really weak nose tackle in week 11, but then in week 12 you're playing Nazir Stackhouse. You try that same footwork against him, he's going to, or Zeke Biggers, he's going to whip your butt. I'm not saying that specifically about Pat Coogan. I'm just making a point looking at Notre Dame's schedule this year. And then I also give like a plus is another thing I do where it's like a great block. So Anthony Knapp's block on the 98-yard touchdown run to Jeremiah Love would have been a plus. He didn't just do his job. He dominantly did his job that resulted in a big play. So I would grade it that way. So like for an offensive lineman, same thing for receiver. So, you get a plus because, yeah, you ran your post route effectively. Then you made a diving catch on it on a bad ball, or you made a great back shoulder catch, or you made a guy miss. Like Jaden Greathouse's touchdown catch against Louisville just as a plus. You did your job. Quarterback threw the ball, you were wide open, you did your job. Jaden Greathouse's one-handed catch on a slot fade against Ohio State is a plus. His catch the slant, then beat a guy on a spin move and turn it into a 34-yard touchdown. That's not just doing your job. That's doing your job exceptionally well. Those are plus type plays, and that's how I grade it. And as far as the grade, it's just, okay, you had 60 plays, you got 50 of them, you got pluses, your grade is 50 divided by 60. Then I count how many plus you are, because that tells me how dominant a guy is. It doesn't necessarily impact the grade. It gives me a level of dominance. So I know that, hey, this guy grades out at 95% every game, and he gets like 1 plus a game. That he just does his job. Then this other guy grades out at like 80%, but he gives me like 7 pluses a game. And then you got to weigh which one do you prefer in your offense. Well, at receiver, I may live with the guy that gives me 80% grade, that gives me 7 pluses, and as opposed to the guy that 95% just kind of does his job. At left guard, I want the guy that grades out at 95% and just does his job but doesn't dominate, as opposed to the guy that's going to have 7 or 8 highlight reel blocks, but then also my quarterback's getting ear-holed 4 times.
Yeah.
You know, or I'm giving up -3 on an inside zone. And you should never give up -3 in an inside zone unless somebody just didn't do their job. So you weigh those different things, and I think that allows me to have a sense of how dominant a performance was, as opposed to just how effective you were doing your job. Right? There's doing your job just from did you get it right or not? Right? It's like a test, Trevor. It's like there's different ways to evaluate, to grade a test. If you have true, false, or multiple choice, or just fill in the blank, that's an easy process. You either got it right or you didn't. You know, if you say that Herbie Hancock was a signer of the Declaration of Independence, you got that wrong. If you say it's John Hancock, you got that right. For those who remember the reference from Tommy Boy. All right, it's Herbie Hancock. But then an essay is a different type of grading process. This is like, okay, yes, you addressed it, but you didn't address it where you showed me you have an understanding of the material. You just regurgitated what the book said. You didn't show me that it sunk in or you learned anything from it. So you're going to grade an essay differently than you're going to grade a multiple choice or fill in the blank or whatever, true, false.
Yeah.
Football to me can be challenging because you can tell me that, hey, I just did my job. But if another guy just does his job on an equal platform, but he has 9 plus pluses and you have 2, well, that's going to help me evaluate who's doing the job better. And you're 95%, this other guy's 91%, but he's got 10 plus pluses and you have 2. That 4% difference is enough for me to say, let me give the guy that's the plus, the dominant guy. That would be more of where that would come into play, as opposed to like if the guy's like 80 and you're 95, I'm not playing a guy that grades out at 80% at left tackle. You know what I mean? Like that's the thing. So how might it be done at Notre Dame? No idea. I have no idea. I do believe the offensive line, I believe, is similar to what I said from what I've been told by a few people, but the specifics of it, I honestly couldn't tell you. But that's how I would grade film. It's really just about an effectiveness. It's finding a way to evaluate the overall. Did you do your job and did you do it with the proper technique and employ the teaching that I gave you or not? And then how dominant were you in doing that job? That's how I would grade.
For me, when I just go back through
ways for each player, by the way, each position group requires some level of nuance. But yeah, go ahead, Trev.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that I do, I don't really release grades. When I would be upon further review, I would put out grades, but I never really tracked any specifically for myself. But when I go through and because I go back through and watch every Notre Dame game after it happens on Sunday, just to stuff to write about, for content, to have good conversation about, and I just like to know, whether they win or lose, I want to know the reason why behind it. And so what I do first is I just watch the game through completely again, and I look for anything that might be very obvious, very apparent, because the more you watch it, the more things start to become very apparent. I'm starting to be able to catch it live when I'm watching it now, not just in a film review of if somebody misses a block or if a wide receiver didn't block well or if a corner missed an assignment or if he got, something like that. But then I go back through and I start really tracking down, drive by drive once I do my, I guess, second review. That's how I do it, just because there's so many things to evaluate over the course of a football game that it's hard to catch it all if you just go and watch it once, or you just try to go back and recollect what you remember live. But that's the only thing that I do.
I am contemplating us doing something like that next year. I do want to do more written post-game analysis next year. That is something that's on the table. Sweet. Where I will do grades and I want to do more film reviews than I did last year. So we just got to figure out how we're going to make it work. But that is something that's on the table. And maybe it's different people doing different positions. I have somebody in mind, actually. I won't say who it is because I'm not sure where he's going to be next year. But somebody in mind doing like the O-line film, and then just kind of find. So it's not just all me doing it, because then it just takes forever. But yeah, that'll be an interesting aspect of it. But we'll see the particulars. We'll see the particulars.
DK, longtime caller, first-time listener.
DK's always trying to start some stuff. I love it.
If you were going to move guys to other positions, why would it be Zinter to tight end and Vernon to big end, and who else?
Well, the reason it would be Zinter to tight end is first and foremost need. I mean, I've said this all about Preston Zinter is I don't really care where you play him, just play him somewhere. Put him somewhere he can help your football team. I mean, he's too good of an athlete, too good of a football player not to be playing somewhere. Tight end is where I believe the need is greatest. I mean, if Notre Dame didn't have Logan Thomas and Boubacar Traore coming back next year, I'd be like, dude, put him at Viper. I think he can help you at Viper. And then you can keep, Josh Burnham at end. And then you could have Patojo and Junior Tuilamaka and then Preston Zinter kind of battling at that Viper position. Well, there's not if he moved to Viper, he'd be having this, like during this season, it would have made sense because you had a need there. But now that you're going into the offseason and Patello's coming back and you've got Boubacar coming back from injury and you've got Junior Tuilamaka and you've got Logan Thomas ascending, you're bringing in Dominic Hulak. There's not as much of a need there. At tight end, there's a great need. You've got Eli Raridon coming back. You've got Jack Larson on scholarship. You're going to be bringing in James Flanagan, but he doesn't enroll until the summer. You have Kevin Bauman coming back, who's a 6-year senior, just kind of a very limited niche type of player, blocker, short yardage. You've got Ty Washington coming in, who's had some nice moments, but again, not nearly a proven guy. And then you do have a walk-on that I think people need to not forget when they're evaluating the depth of the tight end. I'm like, we got to go get another portal guy. Well, don't forget about Henry Garrity either, because I think Henry Garrity is a good football player. He's not going into his third year. I think I would rather kind of bring him along. But like when I look at it with Cooper Flanagan's Achilles, I believe it's been reported it's an Achilles. Notre Dame has never said that. But if it is an Achilles, the odds of him being healthy to kick off the 2025 season are very slim. And I don't want to say never, because there's always some sort of, okay, what was the severity of it? But if he tore his Achilles, he's not going to be playing football in September, I don't think, if at all, next season. So there's a need, and he's a different type of player than your starter. So that's why Preston Zinter to tight end for me makes a ton of sense. Brennan Vernon to defensive end is simply about that's where I think his skill set is best. I have no idea why he gets no shot to play. I don't know if there's something that he's not doing what he needs to do. I don't know if it's he just wasn't recruited by this current staff, so they don't care. I don't know what it is. But the few times I saw Brendan Vernon play in 2022 or 23 as a defensive end, I'm like, that guy flashes. I remember going back to the BC game in 22, I think it was his freshman year, and watching him in pursuit as a defensive end. I'm thinking, that guy flashes. Well, they just were obsessed with putting a bunch of beef on him and moving him inside, and his body just doesn't handle that well. And so I just feel like he's a guy that I think just better let him get down to 270, 265, 270, and let him go play defensive end and not try to stuff him up. I would have done the same thing with Cole Mullins. But, I think that they view him a little bit more as a guy that could help them inside. So as long as that's the case, then, hey, that's kind of how who I would move. As far as anyone else, Anthony Knapp's a guy we've talked about, Trev. I would move inside, center guard, wherever he has the best shot to battle for a starting job next year.
Yeah.
I'd move him inside. I think he could be really good inside. Thinking about some other positions, I would find someone that could play nickel. I don't know who that would be. I'd be open to whoever they think. Somebody, whether it's a safety, whether it's a corner, you need to groom a nickel. You can't 100% rely on portal every single year, because there may be a year where there just aren't good portal options there or good fits for you. So I would like to have someone that's more homegrown that can be your nickel for a few years after Devontae Smith's career is over, or if hopefully Devontae does go down. But, that would be one. that I would find, whether that's Dallas Golden, whether that's Brandon Logan, whether it's Creed Thomas. I don't really have a preference on who it has to be. Ben Minnick. Different options. Bronte Johnson, I've heard talked about. There's different options there. I would say find me a nickel, a on your team guy, not to just give you depth there, but someone that's grooming to be the next in line at the position. So when Devontae Smith leaves, hopefully that player's ready to take over and you don't have to go to the portal for the position. Or if you're going to the portal, it's like, yeah, you're going to come in, but you're going to battle. You're going to have to battle for this job with so-and-so. That would be another one. I don't view any position changes at linebacker being possible, simply because I think the way linebacker's been, it's so interchangeable at the two inside spots that it's like moving Kingston from Mike to Will, or Drake from Mike to Will, or Osbury from Will to Mike, or whatever. It's not even a change. It's not even a position change. It's just like a running back going from the pistol to offset. It's just like you're the same position. You're just lining up differently, and some of your responsibilities are different. But like, it's a very interchangeable position to me. I don't view like slot to Z receiver as a real position change. I don't view going from Z to boundary as a position change like I view going from tackle to guard. I think that's a legitimate position change. There's so many differences that go into that kind of change. So those are some that to me I would look at as potential position changes for Notre Dame. I don't view going from nose to three technique as a position change. That there should be some interchangeableness to that, and there is. We're obsessed on like, man, I just don't know why they always played Howard across the nose, and I'm like, well, yeah, I get it, but he wasn't always on the nose. There's plenty of snaps that I could show you where Riley Mills is on the nose and Howard's, outside. So that would be that's not a position change to me. Going from Viper to big end, that's a position change to me. That's different technique, different responsibilities. Just that would be one. There's nobody that I would move from there. Andrew Gilmore asked, could Jordan Botelho play big end? Because he wants to free up snaps for Logan Thomas. Very fair. I don't think he can. I've asked that in the past, and he never looked comfortable doing it. I think it's a little too late for that now. When Jordan put more weight on, as we saw in 2023, he lost a step. There's a breaking point for every athlete where once you get past that point of weight, there's now diminishing returns. For some guys, they can get up to 270, 275 and still say, but other guys, it's like, once I got past 265, man, I didn't have that burst. I went through that my junior year of college. I had a really bad offensive line the year before. Our offensive line was terrible. It was so bad in one game. We were playing Ferrum, and I was catching the ball, and two guys were just running through. And I got to get at one time, one of our, I think it was Mike Sheehan, I think is his name. But our left tackle's around the field, and he grabs him and just starts punching him in the chest, saying, "Protect the quarterback." It was that bad. Whew. So I was like, I got to put some armor on this offseason. So I got up to like 205, and I felt stiff. And by the end of fall camp, I was down to $185. I just lost all of it, sweated it all off, and I got back to being a little bit more limber. And just for me, you get to a certain point, it's like I stopped having the same agility and the same burst and the same endurance with that extra weight. It's true for a lot of guys. And so that to me is why I say I think Jordan Botelho got past his breaking point when he got up into the 260s, and he didn't have the same burst. And he lost weight this season, got down to closer to 250, 255, and he looked like the old Jordan Botelho again. And I don't know that he doesn't have Josh Burnham's natural power or length to play the end positions, because Josh Burnham can play that at 255. I don't think Jordan Botelho can. And so I just think Viper's the more ideal situation. And based on how Notre Dame has played their defense in the past, Chris Ash may bring some changes to where if you're going to play more of a wide 9 technique with your defensive end, then Jordan Botelho could do that. They play it tighter. They've played it tighter in recent seasons. So, like, that's an issue that R.J. Oben had coming over to Notre Dame. At Duke, he played a very wide 9 technique. He was always in. Now you're asking to play like a 7-eye. You're asking to play more of a tight 5, and he wasn't as good at it. He couldn't handle it as well. I think that's something that allowed him to struggle, or that resulted in his struggles. Is he wasn't as comfortable doing end play the way that Notre Dame needs its end to play. And that factored into it. Andrew mentioned Bryce Young to D-tackle. I mean, could that eventually happen? Sure. I'm not forcing the issue. And right now, Bryce Young is a long way away from being a defensive tackle. He's got a very different build from his dad. Very different build. He's a couple inches taller. He's longer. He's got more of an edge body right now. But with his DNA, there's a chance that if he loves the weight room enough, he just naturally gets to 290 plus. That could happen. And I wouldn't stop him from doing that if that was natural progression, but I'm not forcing the issue.
Sure.
Because I think he could be a really special edge player as well. So I personally would like to see him stay on the edge unless he just naturally outgrows it. And that's the difference is I don't mind a guy gets pumped up and moves inside because he just outgrew the position. Like Riley Mills was recruited to play end. He quickly outgrew that position and looked better inside. It wasn't something that you forced on him. You know what I mean? And the other part of it too is I don't know why you would want to force a guy with his athleticism and his potential inside. All right. I want that big 6'7", 265, which is what he'll be soon, twitchy, powerful, athletic. I mean, a whole lot of D tackles running through blocking kicks the way he's blocking kicks because he's a freaky athlete. I wouldn't want him inside. Because let's say he could play it. Okay, but now who's your stud big end in a few years? Hopefully Chris Burgess, but I would focus more on Chris Burgess maybe growing into a defensive tackle than I would Bryce Young. But if Bryce Young just naturally gets up to 290, 295, and then that makes sense, okay, that's fine. But even if he's 285, if he's still athletic and he's naturally 285, what's to say he can't be a Mario Williams type of defensive end? A 6'7", 280-pound freak of a defensive end.
Yeah.
So, that's not one that I would entertain unless the circumstances forced me to, meaning he's just too big to play end and because his body just naturally blew up. But I'm not putting him on an extra calories, extra carbs, extra supplements to try to get him to 290, 295 like they've done with some other guys. Definitely not doing that. Definitely not doing that. Anyone else that you think of? Well, here's one. If I lose somebody at quarterback, I'm moving Tyler Buckner back to quarterback.
I would say Buckner back to quarterback, depending on what happens throughout the remainder of this offseason. And then we've highlighted potentials for a Jagasaw to move back inside to guard or something, depending on what that lineup is. But I'm not going to list it as a position change because right now it's still open. But we'll kind of see what that looks like. But that could be another one. And I throw that in there just because he started the national championship at left tackle, but he played the semifinals at right guard. So you never know. One of him or Anthony Knapp. We'll just kind of see what happens.
I got the rest of them, huh? I nailed it pretty good. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. I was about to say, that's it, man. That's all I got. Iden Benami, how about Mitch Jeter's game-winning field goal against Penn State? What a legend and how unbelievably clutch. Just a shout out. He doesn't get enough love for that kick. Thank you, brother Mitch.
I don't know how much more love you want him to get. I mean, it was on ESPN. It was Notre Dame did a whole highlight about it. I thought that was a pretty money kick, man. I've seen that thing replayed. I've seen that replayed more than anything else from that game. Mm-hmm. Even more than Christian Gray's pick. I've seen that kick replayed more times, but he was clutch, man. Love it. He was very clutch. He was very clutch in the postseason. There's no doubt. The disappointing thing for me is that we didn't get to see that Mitch Jeter during the regular season through no fault of his own. It wasn't like he choked or he just wasn't healthy, and we got to finally see it. And look, if you're going to tell me, okay, he's going to be healthy and kick 90% of the regular season, he's going to be banged up at the postseason, or he's going to struggle in games that are blowing people out by 40, but he's going to be healthy in the playoffs and be money from 40 plus, I'll take that trade. I'll take 8 of 18 from my kick team if it means he's going to be healthy in the postseason, sure. But he was incredibly clutch. He's a lot like we talked about the other day, in 15, 20 years when we're looking back on the season, because this was a memorable season to me. And we're not going to remember RJ Oben like, man, I just thought he was going to be better. I mean, it may be part of the conversation, but we're going to be like, man, do you remember that play he made against Georgia? That was so huge. Like that alone was worth him coming over. I don't care what else he did. When we think of Mitch Jeter in 5-10 years, we're not going to think about, remember that period of time when he just couldn't hit a kick because he wasn't, we're going to be like, man, he was so clutch in the playoffs, man, just 240-plus yarders against Georgia and, drilled a 48-yarder against Indiana right before halftime. And man, that game winner against Penn State. I mean, because like for me, that was the end zone we were in. So we're in the corner of the end zone and the press box is in the corner. So like I'm watching the ball go, but because we're in the corner, I can't see if it was inside or not. So I see him kick it. And as soon as I see him kick it, my eyes immediately go right to the bleachers at where I knew that there were Notre Dame fans, and I'm like waiting on their reaction. And when they start losing it, I'm like, nailed it, like he got it because I couldn't see it because I was on the side. I was, and so I could. And when you're on the side, you can only tell if it goes through you. So like I could tell if you miss it to my side, and I can tell that it's inside of the upright near me, but I don't know that it's outside of the other one. I can only tell those two. So, but that was such a huge kick. And being in the press box and you've got to stay calm. You're not allowed to cheer. I mean, I was like, I was struggling to not cheer on that one, man. I was real struggling to not cheer on that one.
There's no chance. I would have gotten in so much trouble. Brian would have received phone calls. Look, that play was awesome. I'm going to remember that for a very long time. Yeah. Very long time. That was fantastic. It was awesome. Mark Avalone, though it would never be considered if the bump zone was extended to 5 to 10 yards from the line of scrimmage, would it level the playing field for defense to combat short passes and shallow crossing routes?
Sure. I mean, this is more of an NFL rule, right? I don't believe that's a college rule. I don't think there's a bump zone in college. That's more of an NFL rule. I don't know, Trev. You watch more NFL than I do. I mean, yeah,
maybe. I mean, in theory, this is a good question, Mark, because I get where you're coming from. In theory, sure, because it would allow DBs to be more handsy up to 10 yards, but even then, like they would still, I believe, because even in 5-yard situation, if you still hold, you can be handsy. You just can't straight up hold, which you'll still see some holding penalties in 5-yard short routes when receivers break back to the inside and DBs get beat across their face. So maybe I honestly don't have a good answer for that. On paper, potentially. That's the best I got. Coach Bent 574, if USC does decide to pause or cancel the annual Notre Dame game, would you rather ND replace them with a regional team like Michigan State or Purdue, or a more cross-country opponent?
I would rather, we talked about this a little bit the other day, Coach. I would rather see them put one of those two teams on the schedule, even if it is an alternating. Now, the interesting thing is Notre Dame and USC, I believe, are done after 2026, correct?
Correct.
I think that's the last year that they have that they're on Notre Dame schedules, 2026. Mm-hmm. So they play November 28th. Starting 2027, they're not on it. Well, in 2027, Notre Dame already has Purdue and Michigan State on the schedule. Same year. They're both on the schedule in 26. They're both on the schedule in 28. So then the question, 27. So then the question is, okay, now Purdue's on the schedule in 2028. Purdue's on the schedule. Michigan State's or Michigan comes on the schedule later. But so from 25 to 28, you already have one or both of those teams on the schedule. And so in 2 of those years, 26 and 27, you already have both of those teams in your schedule. So in that particular year, I'd say, okay, replace USC with a more national game. Maybe you can find a West Coast team to play. Maybe you go out there and play Cal. Maybe you go play Washington. Maybe, something like that. Maybe you play a Big 12 team down in Dallas or, Kansas City, or, you could find a couple different games to play that are out of your norm. But once those two teams come back off the schedule, I would try to get them back on the schedule. That's what I would like to do. And because I like the notion of Notre Dame playing like one team from every power conference. I like that idea.
Yes.
But it's nice to have multiple games against more than just the ACC. Because you can say, well, yeah, you beat Texas A&M. That's great. But how would you have fared against whatever? And then it's like, okay, well, we beat Texas A&M and we beat Georgia. So, I mean, who else would you like? we beat, we beat your champ, Big Ten, you can, same thing. But why did that happen? That happened in the postseason.
Mm-hmm.
But, I'd like the idea of like, okay, you beat the 5 ACC teams. This past year, Notre Dame beat 2 Big Ten teams in the regular season, which is still weird to say with USC and Purdue. I would like to say, okay, give me that. Give me 2 to 3 Big Ten teams on my schedule. I think there's going to be a lot of I would imagine, this is just a guess, I would imagine that there's going to be a little bit of push from NBC to say, hey, listen, if USC comes off your schedule, we'd really love it if you could schedule another Big Ten team to replace them. That way we still get you, because right now, not every game, but a lot of the Notre Dame, or it could be from CBS or all the different people, like the Big Ten would want that because they want to have those Notre Dame road games. So it's more so from, maybe the Big Ten side of it as opposed to necessarily just NBC. But NBC would definitely want that because there's a good chance they're going to get that extra game. Hey, we'd really love it if and also for NBC, it's like when it's a home and home, man, we'd really love to have you guys playing Michigan, or we really love to have you guys schedule a home and home against such and such, because that's good for us because now we're getting a team that we also have a relationship with. There may be a push there to say, can you schedule more Big Ten teams? Which I wouldn't be opposed to. I would actually like that. But I also could understand Notre Dame's desire to try to, hey, but we want to get out of the region more. And that's why we want to pick up more of those national games. So I think you can do that in 26 and 27, Trev, because you already have Purdue and Michigan State on the schedule. Mm-hmm. After that, I really like the idea of getting Michigan and Purdue on the schedule. What I would do is I'd replace Stanford with Michigan State and Purdue. And then if USC wants to come off the schedule, then I'd just add, okay, we're going to play a West Coast team or a Southwest team in that slot. So, like, hey, look, is there any way you can get into Dallas or into Texas every November, or where you're playing either in Texas or playing a team from Texas every November instead of USC, at the end of the year? So for recruiting purposes, I would look into something like that. Or you make a deal with the ACC and say, hey, listen, we're going to take this extra slot that was going to USC, and we're going to get with you guys, and we want that slot filled for the next 10 years with either Clemson, Florida State, or Miami. With the exception of years where we already have 2 of them, we don't want all 3 of them, but, work with them in that regard and say, hey, listen, and maybe in those years where you already have 2 of them, we want to play SMU, because then you get the Dallas effect. Like, those are different things. So I think Notre Dame has a lot of options there. And this notion that Notre Dame needs USC more than USC needs Notre Dame, I think is absolute nonsense. I think it's the other way around, to be completely honest with you. And Notre Dame could easily work with the ACC to fill that void. They could work with the Big Ten to fill that void. They could say, hey, we're going to go play some SEC games. The SEC would love to get Notre Dame on the schedule more, because then they can start building a relationship where if the time comes that Notre Dame is thinking longer and harder about joining a league, then the SEC can say, hey, look, we've partnered with you for 2 games a year, and we've done great, and we've done this. We've treated you guys phenomenally. We've done this. We've done that. We've had some great games together. Let's do this thing more permanently. Then Notre Dame would have more suitors that then they can just kind of drive their price up a little bit. So there's a lot of different angles to this, Trev, that you have to think about. But you also have to make sure that it's something that benefits you. Like playing Oregon, to me, benefits Oregon way more than it benefits Notre Dame, in my opinion. But so those are some different things that I would look into and say, hey, I want to see more of this. Or like you said, Notre Dame and Clemson have talked about wanting to form a rivalry. Maybe they just do that. Hey, fine, USC don't want to play us. Hey, Clemson, you guys will start an annual rivalry. Let's do it. Let's play every year right in the middle of October. We'll come to your place. You come to our place. Let's have some fun with it. plenty of options that of programs that are better or just every bit as mediocre as USC. If they want to go mediocre, plenty of mediocre programs that would schedule Notre Dame gladly. But there's also some really good teams that you can say, hey, Clemson, let's do this. Or, hey, Florida State, let's do this. There's a lot of different things they could do. Because I don't think there's anything that's going to prevent Notre Dame from adding an ACC school to their schedule if they wanted to. I'm sure they could make a call to Jim Phillips, but hey, listen, we're going to lose USC after 2026. We want to put Clemson on the slate every year. Now, the years that we're already scheduled to play Clemson, if you want to add another ACC team to our schedule, go for it. Let's talk about it. Because there's going to be some years where Clemson's already on the schedule. They're not replacing USC. They're already there. So those are some different things that I would consider doing. Dude, I think there's been some awesome questions so far, Trev. I'm like, yeah, it's going to be an 8-hour show with some of these questions, but this is some great questions so far. What are your thoughts on this one, Trevor?
Yeah, man, look, at the end of the day, at the bare minimum, what I would like to see is, and to map this out from year to year, I like the idea of Notre Dame playing across the country. I do. So I would go, let's say, and I'm not counting or taking into account who's already scheduled. So, like, let's say after USC's off the schedule, 27-28, you play Michigan State in a home and home, and then you go somewhere cross country. And then 28 or 29-30, you play Purdue in a home and home, and then somewhere cross country at the bare minimum. Now, ideally, you get both of them on the same schedule like you do in 27 and 28, which I'm going to be a really big fan of. But at the very bare minimum for me, what I would like to see is Michigan State in a home and home and a cross-country opponent in the same season, and then a Purdue in a home and home, and then a cross-country opponent. At least, we're talking 2 out of the 12 games. So you break it down, Notre Dame's going to play 5 ACC opponents, call it. Navy's going to be one of them because I don't see that game going away. If USC goes away, you're going to play at least I like the idea of playing 2 Big Ten teams. So now you're up to 8 teams. So you're left with 4 slots of, okay, do we find a cross-country opponent? Do we play something like, in 23, they played Tennessee State. Didn't love the idea of them playing an FCS team because that was the first time that Notre Dame, up until that point, was one of like 3 schools who had never played an FCS opponent in the regular season. But I get it. It was cool. It was one of the first HBCUs that Notre Dame had ever played on campus. So that added a little bit to it, which I'm fine with. But yeah, at the bare minimum, at least one of them and a cross-country opponent in the same season every year. At the bare minimum for me.
There's a comment from Fighting Mike. He said, Notre Dame should accept playing 2 of Clemson, Florida State, and Miami every year from the ACC, but cap that at 4 ACC games, then schedule 3 Big Tens, including USC. But again, the whole premise of the question is USC won't play you anymore. 1 SEC, 1 Big 12, Navy, and then 2 other G5s. And I'm fine with that. I don't really care about adding a 3rd Big Ten game. I would rather play 5 ACC teams than a 3rd Big Ten team. And the thing that you guys have to understand is Notre Dame doesn't care about the geography of their opponent from a travel standpoint. Notre Dame cares about the geography of the opponent from a who are we trying to recruit? Where are we trying to build more influence? Notre Dame doesn't need to play in Ohio or Michigan or Pennsylvania or Illinois to grow their base or get in front of a bunch of alums. Those people are already coming to Notre Dame games because they're in Ohio and Michigan and Illinois. Notre Dame has got in the ACC because it allowed them to expand their brand, get in front of new markets, but then also get into around alumni networks that are across the nation. The more you want to start playing more Big Tens, the more you regionalize yourself, which is exactly why, even if you take away the animosity I have towards why Notre Dame never joined the Big Ten in the first place, then you get into, but that makes them a regional program because you've put them in a regional conference. People don't think it makes sense, but Notre Dame being a team that is nowhere close to being in the ACC makes them a national brand. Why else would you have Notre Dame in your league? Getting down in Virginia and playing in front of the talent there, your alums there, getting into the North Carolina market, which is not only good for TV revenue as the Raleigh, Durham, that carry right outside of Raleigh, Charlotte, as those markets grow because the state is getting bigger and there's a lot of migration to the state from different parts of the country, especially the Midwest, but you're seeing some southern migration up because there's job opportunities that are opening up. Like a few years ago, I remember South Carolina had a Boeing factory move into their state. Well, when those things happen, all of a sudden you see migration because other people looking for work, because there are still people in this country that want to work, will then move up to where some of these opportunities are. Even if, hey, I'm not getting a job at Boeing, these guys that are local get those jobs at Boeing, but I'm going to take their job that's now opened up. And then, and so that's where a lot of migration patterns happen in the United States is you grew up, you're in a manufacturing area of the Midwest. Manufacturing's not there anymore. Steel's not really there anymore. When I was growing up in Ohio, in Lima, we had a Standard Oil BP plant. We had a tank plant. We had Ford. I mean, there's a lot of those factories there. Well, now Ford's like half the factories, I believe, shut down. The refinery's not as populated as much anymore. There's just a lot of those manufacturing jobs have gone overseas, gone to Mexico, or moved to a different climate or to a different part of the United States that maybe has more business-friendly rules and laws for manufacturing companies. So all those things factor into migration shifts, population shifts, which has been true for history. Why did certain parts Native Americans move from this part? Because they were following buffalo, or they were trying to get out of certain harsher climates and get in. I mean, those things have always impacted societies, and those things impact us now. Well, that's a market you want to get into. You need to have an eye on those trends. Say, listen, this is growing. Let's get down there. Georgia's a state that's growing. There's a lot of migration to that state with job opportunities and things like that. Florida's a booming state, especially since 2020, when a lot of people migrated down to Florida. We want to there's a ton of talent in those areas of high school talent. We want to get in front of that talent. And as doing this job, you realize how impactful it is that Notre Dame gets to play in front of those kids. A lot of these kids, first time they ever get to see Notre Dame play is visiting another school. Hey, I was there when I saw them play North Carolina as a sophomore. You say, well, most of these, but a lot of these five-star kids, they as freshmen and sophomores, they're attending local games. They're seeing Notre Dame play that way. And that's how Notre Dame gets their foot in the door. I remember when, funny story, Notre Dame got on Myron Tungvaloa late in the process. And part of the reason they got on him is because they saw him at the USC game. Mike Elston saw him, ran into him, sized him up, and he liked what he saw from Notre Dame, and boom, there you go. He's in Notre Dame's class. So just getting in front of these kids in these different regions is huge for Notre Dame. And you start playing all your games are in the Midwest, that can limit some of that reach. So I understand that you all some of you look at it simply from but the ACC sucks standpoint. Well, okay, good. So that means all those talented kids, A, don't have in-state schools are any good, and B, watch you dominate. That's a good thing. You know what I mean? Like, that's a good thing for you. So I just think that's why it's good to have the 5 ACC games. And I get you guys don't like the ACC and the teams suck, but there's a lot more important things here than just filling your schedule with Bama, Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, USC, Texas. I mean, that's not realistic. Mm-mm. And so if you're going to replace a bad ACC team, you don't replace them with a great team from another league. You want to replace them with a bad team from another league, because you can't have 10 great games every year. You can't have 10 powerhouses on your opponent. Like, we had the toughest schedule in the country. We should get credit for that. Yeah, you went 8-4. Well, no one else would have gone 8-4 against the schedule. Maybe not, because no one else was dumb enough to schedule that. You know what I mean? Like, at least facts. Georgia can say, hey, we were forced. The schedule was forced upon us. We didn't choose it. So I don't want to get rid of an ACC game to get a third Big Ten game. I would only want to play 3 Big Ten teams if USC was part of that. So, like, for fighting Mike's thing, I'm fine with his proposal of 3 Big Ten teams, because you and I have talked about this. Give me Purdue, give me Michigan State on the schedule every year, or give me those 2 teams in a rotating 2-2-2-2, and then I'm going to take another year where I'm rotating between Northwestern and maybe have Michigan on the schedule every now and then, which they do in the 30s. Maybe schedule a home and home with Ohio State once a decade, which is what I think is about what it should be. Give me a home and home once a decade with that team. Give me a home and home with Michigan once a decade. And then just have that revolving second Big Ten slot. So I'm always playing Michigan State or Purdue. And in some years, that roving spot is both of them. It's Michigan State and Purdue, which I'm fine with. And then do it that way. And then the only way I'd have would want a third Big Ten team is if it's USC.
Yeah.
If it's not USC, then I don't want to do that. But I'm not sacrificing the fifth ACC game to get a third Big Ten game. I'd rather sacrifice an SEC game or a Big 12 game. Like the Big 12 is at the very bottom of my priority list of teams to play. Very bottom of my priority list, especially since I can get the same thing from the Big 12 that I would get from the ACC that I could get from the Big 12 or the Pac-12. Meaning, okay, give us Cal, give us Stanford in a part of the ACC rotation, and give us SMU. Like to say, look, hey, we want every year we want either a road game at Cal, at SMU, or at Stanford. That would be part of my negotiation with the ACC is like, look, we want to play one of those three teams on the road every year. Help us with getting that regional game there, and it helps you. Because now you're trying to build your markets for these teams. What's going to be better for Cal? North Carolina going out there? Boston College going out there? Or Notre Dame going out there? It's Notre Dame going out there.
Yeah.
And then you're having it on your so those are things I would do that I would much rather do that. Because now what do I need the Big 12 for if I can play SMU every couple years down there? And then I can schedule a Shamrock Series game against an ACC team or something like that, or Navy or some other team in Dallas or in Arlington. I don't need the Big 12. I can play. If Notre Dame wanted to schedule a game in Phoenix or in Arizona, they don't need Arizona and Arizona State to do that. They can just call up, the Cardinals and say, hey, we'd like to play a Shamrock Series game in your stadium.
Mm-hmm.
Are you cool with that? Yeah. They don't need those teams for that. And you get nothing from playing the Big 12 now. Like not now that Texas and Oklahoma are in it. I mean, every now and then I wouldn't mind playing TCU, but I'm not regularly playing the Big 12. I'd be okay occasionally scheduling a home and home with TCU because now you're getting into that Dallas region, right? Dallas-Fort Worth area. But what do you get out of playing Baylor? What do you get out of playing Kansas or Kansas State? What do you get out of – there's nothing in it for Notre Dame. You're supposed to beat them. If they beat you, it's the end of the world, the way that people will react. There's no value. There's no recruiting value to playing them unless you're going to play like a one-time game against K-State in Arlington. Okay, that's fine. I can live with that. But there's no value to constantly having the Big 12 on your schedule. A couple of years ago, I said differently because it would have been like Texas, Oklahoma, some of those teams. But it's a different animal now. Like Colorado being on the schedule doesn't do anything for me. BYU's one because there's some level of rivalry there, but I'd rather play BYU in a one-off game in Kansas City in Arrowhead, or at the Rose Bowl or in Arlington, something like that. I wouldn't care about a home and home with any of those Big 12 teams at this point in time. That's my stance on that one.
Yeah, if anything, if you're going to take away an ACC game, I'd rather you add another SEC team. I don't really have a desire to play three Big Ten teams. I mean, honestly, even if it is, I like two Big Ten teams, borderline even including USC, and then play one of, because for some of the reasons that you listed, like for regional purposes, like Purdue and Notre Dame, It is a rivalry, but like there's no real benefit. Like kind of the same. I mean, you're expected to beat Purdue every single time that you play them. I mean, there's been no threat of Purdue could take this one. I don't know if that's been the case for a very long time.
The occasional Drew Brees tenure where they win a game or two, but usually when they've beaten Notre Dame, it's because Notre Dame sucks.
Mm-hmm.
Like Charlie Weiss lost a couple games to Purdue, Bob Davie, But it was like when in the Breeze era, they got a couple wins, but it was partly because Notre Dame sucked at the time. Yeah, when Notre Dame's good, they're not losing to Purdue very often. Once a decade, maybe.
Yep. Yep. So for those, I'd rather add an SEC team like an Arkansas is a perfect one. You're going and you're on the road. You're an SEC country, but you're not traveling down to Athens or Tuscaloosa or Austin or Death Valley every 2 years. I would rather, per this scenario, if you are going to take away an ACC game, I'd rather give it to an SEC than a third Big Ten.
Right. Agree. Good. Very good discussion.
ND, it just means more. Who is your breakout linebacker this coming season? And can you see them producing a minimum of 70 tackles, 7+ tackles for a loss, and forcing at least 4 turnovers?
Well, if you're going to talk to me about a breakout guy putting up those kind of numbers, I mean, you can't talk about Drake Bowen, right? Drake's already kind of there. Although from a tackle standpoint, I could see Drake having a breakout from the standpoint if he's already still above 70 tackles, but let's say he has more TFLs this year and things like that. But like Drake, 2 of those things he kind of already meets. But if I were to see a guy who's not really at that level of production that jumps into that level of production, like I can't really say that Jaden Alsbury is that kind of breakout player because Jaden was tied for the second on the team in tackles for loss is 6.5. So if he gets to 7, that's not really a breakout. He was at 58 tackles and 6.5 tackles for loss already. The guy that I would have as a potential breakout that didn't have a close to that production anyway, you know exactly where I'm going, Trev. It's Kingston. It's Kingston Viliama-Asa. I could see Kingston being a guy that takes a lot of Jack Kaiser snaps next year. A lot of Jack Kaiser snaps, if not most of Jack Kaiser snaps. And going from a guy that had 30, what was Kingston's numbers? He had 30-some tackles. Now he also missed several. He missed a couple games, wasn't healthy. Kingston had 37 tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss and a sack. If Kingston and Drake are starting side by side next year, I could see both of them being over 70 tackles, both of them being over 7 tackles for loss, both of them being turnover machines. I mean, what did Kingston have, 2 fumble recoveries this year?
I know he had at least a pick.
Yeah, he had a pick. But he also had a fumble recovery in the playoff. I mean, he recovered the fumble against Ohio State. But I thought he had a couple others. I need to look up the Notre Dame stats because they don't put it on CFB Nation or CFB stats for some reason, which is weird. But let's see here. He has INT return. So you have to find it. But I know he had at least 2 fumble recoveries this year. Like I can just in my head envision it, including one against Ohio State. He had a pick this year. So yes, he's not that far of that regard, but if you give him a lot of Jack snaps, he's absolutely going to be in that category. That's an easy one for me. Trev, what do you think? I could the reason I guess it's hard for me to put anybody else in there because everybody else is already kind of at that level of production. And I don't know that Jaylen Sneed becomes an every down guy like that.
They're either at that level of production or we'd be talking about a guy who has yet to see a lot of meaningful minutes, like a Teddy Rizak, like a Preston Zinter, like a Madden Faramo. And with how loaded that room is, I can't confidently say, Madden Faramo is going to go from never playing a college snap to having 70 tackles and 7 tackles for a loss. If he does, we're having a really fun conversation throughout the entirety of the season. But yeah, for me, it's Kingston. I don't think you can really throw Drake Bowen or Jaden Ausberry in that one. So, and then I just looked at the raw numbers for Kingston. He was credited with 1 fumble recovery, 1 interception.
I'll have to go back and look at that because I'm pretty sure I remember him recovering the second fumble at home. It was a home game. I have to go back and find it. But very disruptive players, all of them. Mm-hmm. But Kingston's the one who's furthest away from that, and I think he's very talented. Mm-hmm. Very talented. It's got another one from Ayad Benami.
Ayad Benami, did anyone else see Rick Pitino's speech to his team this past week? Go watch it. If not, wow, what a freaking legend. Love those coaches, few and far. Coach Shrew got heated this week too.
I didn't see either one of those. I heard about it. I saw people tweeting about it, but I didn't watch either one of them. I know you watched Coach Shrewsbury's, but we had to talk about that. What did you watch Rick Pitino's by chance?
I did. I saw snippets of it. It was a good speech. I mean, I liked it. It was just about fighting on and battling adversity, things like that. It was a good speech. Coach Shrew's, the mindset was there. but you can't go out and lose by 30 the next game after you have a emphatic speech like that. I will just leave it at that.
So bad. That was one of the ugliest men's basketball games I've seen in a long time.
It was
very long time.
Yeah. That
very
one
disappointing.
That one was tough. Salty Virginia Peanuts, which regular season football opponent will be the most challenging for the Irish?
I feel like he asked that last week, and I thought we said Texas A&M. I just think they're the best team. I know Miami's on the road, but I just think Texas A&M is the best, the most talented team that they'll play. Miami doesn't scare me like a lot of other. It does. Apparently, they do a lot of other people. This is the same conversation we had this past offseason about Texas A&M. Mm-hmm. Just remember, like you and I remember you and I having a conversation, and Sean Davis and I had this conversation. Like, when did Texas A&M become Georgia? The way that part of the fan base in our chat was acting every day like, I don't know if they can beat A&M, and this is such a good team, and I don't know how you handle this guy. And I'm like, guys, this is freaking Notre Dame, right? Did we start covering Purdue all of a sudden? Like, did A&M become Bama all of a sudden, or Georgia all of a sudden? Like, what are we talking about here? They're gonna be lucky to get a win, and at the Kyle Field's such a hard place to play. Is it really? Because I see them losing home all the time.
Before Notre Dame traveled down there, Texas A&M was 500 at home all time at Kyle Field against Power 5 opponents.
Yeah, like it just like, guys, what are we doing here? Stop buying narratives. Like, but I think this version of A&M is going to be better all around. Mm-hmm. There are certain spots they're not going to be as good. Their D-line's not going to be as good as it was last year.
No.
Their secondary is going to be similar. They're going to be going into year 2 of the defensive system. Their linebackers are both coming back. I love the York kid. He's a good football player. Their entire starting offensive line comes back. Plus, they have at least one other guy that's if Feathery doesn't start, then the guy he starts over will have starting experience. If Feathery doesn't start, then he has starting experience coming off the bench. So that right tackle battle, whoever loses is going to give them depth of someone who has started before that's not playing. Mm-hmm. I love their backfield. Marcel Reed at quarterback is not a great quarterback. I think he'll be better than what Connor Wegman was in game 1 in the system that Klein wants to run, and coming off of an injury, which Connor Wegman was. I don't think Marcel Reed would have done any better last year against Notre Dame. I think he'll do better this year than what either of them would have done last year. Does that make sense? So I'm not one of those, man, if they would have started Marcel Reed, I'm like, okay, I watched Marcel Reed barely beat Bowling Green. Shut your pie hole. Like, just, I watched him go 1-4 in his last 5 starts. So just shut it with that whole, you didn't have to beat Texas A&M with Marcel Reed. Just because Brian Kelly made him look like a world beater doesn't mean he is, because they do that to every mobile quarterback. People still think some people think Lenore Sellers the next Lamar Jackson because they watched him against LSU and before he got hurt. I'm like, well, yeah, LSU makes a lot of mobile quarterbacks look like the next Lamar Jackson. I'm just saying. But that's my LSU rant for the day. Sorry, insured by Big. It's a Brian Kelly thing. But I still think overall, best team they're going to play, best in the trenches, really good skill. I just think they're going to be the best team that they're going to play next year. They're toughest, most challenging opponent. Now, you could, if you're going to argue Miami, the only argument that I would accept is it is game 1 and it is on the road, and that's very fair. And it's still a good enough roster that if you don't play well, they can beat you. There's a difference between saying if you don't play well, that team can beat you, and like, I'm afraid of that team. Big difference. And that's where I'm at with Miami, just like I was at A&M. Notre Dame, if they play their game, will beat Miami by 10 plus points. Notre Dame didn't even play that well against Texas A&M and still beat them by 10. And on either side of the ball, same thing with Miami. If they play their game, they'll win by double digits. They will. If they don't, then Miami could beat them. So I just think that'll be the one. And then after those two, there's nobody to me that has the same kind of roster that A&M's going to have. That doesn't mean there aren't teams that are going to be challenging and could beat Notre Dame if they play an off day. I'm just saying there's nobody's going to have a roster as good as A&M's after that game. I think the two most talented teams they play are the first two.
Fair. I'll answer it this way because we've answered that it's Texas A&M. I do think that there's teams on the latter part of their schedule that will present some challenges, not from a talent standpoint. When you go and look at Notre Dame's schedule this upcoming year, from a talent perspective, they are better than all 12 of the teams that they're playing. Texas A&M's probably the closest, like we've alluded to. But I've been doing all the opponent previews for teams coming up. And after USC, they play some relatively veteran teams. I still have to dive into Syracuse and Stanford. Boston College returns a little bit. Navy returns a lot of its production. Pitt returns a lot of their production from this past season. And when I mean challenging, I don't mean it could be a shootout, and if Notre Dame doesn't get the ball last, they'll lose. It's just at that point, especially if they beat Miami and Texas A&M, they'll be cruising. I don't see them losing to USC at home. You know, there's a good chance, especially if they beat Texas A&M and Miami, there's a good chance they might be undefeated going into that stretch of 3 games of teams that return a lot. So I think that could be a little bit interesting. Boston College, they have some questions at the quarterback position. You don't know what that's going to look like, whether it's going to be Dylan Lonergan or the kid that replaced Thomas Castellanos this past season. If
Lonergan is their starter, then I become a little bit more concerned about BC. Because he's a lot of tools. He was always going to be raw. I mean, because he was a baseball guy. But he's got a lot of talent. Mm-hmm. A lot of talent. And the one thing that I think Bill O'Brien's decent at is developing quarterbacks. Mm-hmm. He's been pretty decent at that in his tenure.
So it's going to be interesting to see what that looks like. I just answering it in a little bit of a different light because it's if we're just going based off of it's Texas A&M. I mean,
we're already getting the weather, the heat thing. It's going to be the heat in Miami is going to be rough in August. Okay. Didn't we just are we going to go through that again? Like, didn't we just have to deal with that with the A&M? Oh, the heat of Texas A&M. All right. I mean, okay. All right.
Plead the fifth on that one.
Yeah. But look, Andrew, we could spend all offseason freaking out about Miami, dude, but you did the same thing with Texas A&M last year. At some point in time, it's not even about Miami. He says, Miami will be athletic. They are. Cristobal's reputation is to be good early and then fade. Okay, fair. But when have they ever played and beat a team like Notre Dame? This isn't Brian Kelly's Notre Dame team, man. Like, that's a thing of the past. These fears that we have about Notre Dame playing other teams. If, like, the one that I just saw that I responded to is that was kind of laughing at was, and I understand it because for a time that was true, but it was what Andrew asked, what about playing in Miami? The city of Miami is a house of horrors for Notre Dame. I'm like, brother, didn't we just watch them beat Penn State in Miami? If they can beat Penn State in Miami, I ain't worried about the Hurricanes without Cam Ward. Now, can they beat Notre Dame? Of course. But it'll be more about Notre Dame not playing their game than it will be necessarily about Miami. And that's how it was in 2017. Notre Dame played like crap. They were intimidated before the game even started. Why? Because their head coach was Brian Kelly. Right? Brian Kelly's not coaching Notre Dame anymore, and Jimmy Johnson's not coaching Miami anymore. Dennis Erickson's not coaching Miami anymore. And so, yeah, I get, Miami, they start early. Fine. That's great. But they just could they beat Notre Dame? Yes. Notre Dame should not be afraid of playing Miami. If they play their game, they will beat Miami. Just simple as that.
My lesson learned from 2024 is any team can beat Notre Dame. Of all the teams that you would have told me that Notre Dame was going to lose to in 2024, it was not going to be Northern Illinois. Look, I said this in a previous show when we were talking about the quarterbacks and how they should start the veteran because of the gauntlet of the open. Look, they don't open up their season down against 2019 LSU in Death Valley at night, and then they don't host 2012 Alabama at home the next week. They are good quality opponents, and they are good quality opponents that Notre Dame should beat and beat soundly. What does soundly look like when you talk about good opponents? Like what they did to Texas A&M at Kyle Field. 23-13 or 23-10. Look, I get it. And to a degree, a lot of the BK PTSD left me after this past season. I don't look at Miami and I don't look at Texas A&M and think that they're going to need the miracle in the right hand of God and whoever starts at quarterback to throw for 500 yards.
Gotta play the perfect game. Gotta play the perfect game. No, you don't.
You could make the argument that Notre Dame had 14 wins, broke a program record, and the most perfect game they played that year was against Army. They didn't play a perfect game against Indiana. They didn't play a perfect game. They didn't have a perfect game in the postseason. We just got to get out of this.
They passed for 90 yards and beat Georgia by 13.
Man, to a degree, I get it, but we got to get out of this. Look, I understand. It's hot. It's also hot in Indiana, man. I've lived here my entire life.
The humidity is different in Florida. But my whole thing is, if you live in Florida, you think Florida heat's worse than anywhere else. And if you live in Texas, you think Texas heat is anywhere. And it is. And the reality is that, guys, it just, the game's going to be a night game. And as we saw in Texas this year, playing a game at 7:30 is a whole lot different than playing a game at noon in those areas. But at the end of the day, it wasn't the Notre Dame players cramping up in Texas. It was the Texas players, right? I mean, we're just not going to do that this offseason. We're just not. And like Trevor, there's a difference between puffing our chests. Notre Dame's going to beat everyone by 40, and saying, look, I respect that opponent. I respect the fact that if you don't play your game, you could lose to that team. We just saw a Notre Dame team that set a program for records and did all the things you talked about, lose to Northern Illinois.
Facts.
I mean, but there's a difference between respecting your opponent and having a trepidation about an opponent, which a lot of people tend to have. That was the whole offseason. You'd have thought Notre Dame was like a 15-point dog and had no shot playing A&M the way that some people in the chat were acting. It wasn't just the game week. It was like that whole summer. We talk about something positive. Hey, we think Notre Dame might have a really good running back room. Yeah, but what about that D-line at Texas A&M? Like, at what point in time do you start accepting the fact that other people need to be worrying about Notre Dame? Miami needs to worry about, man, I hope we don't start our season off with a home loss, more so than Notre Dame needs to be worried about, oh, gee. So you can go, that Miami team's going to be a problem. Notre Dame should respect Miami. They should respect Texas A&M.
Yes.
But they have a better roster. Miami's athletic. I get that. They're not as athletic as Notre Dame is, especially with all the guys they lost. You know, it's like I had the same conversation with a former Notre Dame player during the regular season, or actually it was during championship week, trying to tell me how much more athletic Georgia was than Notre Dame. Didn't look like that when they played. I just still think there's a lot of people, even now, apparently, that are still living in this world of Notre Dame is a team that has to play the perfect game in order to beat people. And I watched Notre Dame beat a lot of people by 30, 40 points last year playing solid football. Why they do that? Because this is a very talented football team. They don't have to play the perfect game anymore to win those games. That's where I'm coming from. So, they're not breaking in a freshman quarterback. Blake Hebert's not starting at Notre Dame next year. So unless Blake Hebert's going to be starting quarterback, Notre Dame will not be starting a freshman quarterback next year. And I'm consistent on that stance because I also don't believe redshirt freshmen should be on the freshman All-American team because you're in your second year of college. So we can look for any excuse to panic that we want, but we're just not going to do that. If this year taught us anything, it's that at some point in time, you need to start having a little bit of like this team's actually really good. And it's okay to say that, right? So, no, he's not a freshman. A freshman is not the same as a redshirt freshman. Why? Because a redshirt freshman has been in college now for 2 years. And if you can't beat – and who's going to start for Miami? It's probably not going to be Carson Beck. So, again, if you want to panic about how Notre Dame's got to be afraid of Miami, you can have that fun. We're not going to engage that all summer. I mean, it's February, and some of you are already freaking out about Miami. Carson Beck's their quarterback. Good. That means they're going to downgrade at quarterback compared to last year. Because Carson Beck's not what you people think he is, apparently. So I just think that's funny. Miami's a good football team, and we just got done saying the two most talented teams they're going to play are the first two games of the year, no doubt, no doubt. But both of those teams are capable of beating Notre Dame. But Notre Dame has a significantly better roster than Miami, and if you can't beat them with a redshirt freshman who's very talented, then you've got much bigger problems. Because you shouldn't need CJ Carr to carry your team against Miami.
Mm-hmm.
You know? So, yeah. And you can talk about Miami, but when you talk like you're freaking out, then we're going to say you're freaking out. So, simple as that. You can talk about it all you want. We didn't ban you from the chat. Just saying this is the same crap you guys said all last year about Texas A&M. It's the same thing. Oh God, A&M, that team had more talent than this Miami team is going to have, in my opinion. It's close, but you did the same thing last year, and some of you just like to worry. Okay, fine. Be worried about Miami, and if you're worried about Miami, then you don't think Notre Dame's going to be that great of a team next year.
Aiden Benami, is it too late for Jaylen Sneed to change his style to be able to read and react, or whatever the term would be used, in comparison to his excellent but mostly pass rushing skill set?
I don't know if it's about changing a style, because I actually think that's already happened. I mean, we saw Jaylen Sneed doing a lot more than just rushing the passer late this season. So I think that's already started to happen. I just don't know that he is going to be an every down linebacker on this team, but it used to be because I didn't think he had that ability, to be completely honest with you, Trev. I mean, he was a really athletic kid that didn't show me the instincts or feel for the game to be kind of an impactful player. But I think what we saw from Jaylen Sneed this year is he did develop that more. He has had a little bit of an Asmar Bilal type of emergence this past season, but I don't know that that's going to result in him being a every down backer, more so because of Kingston and Jaden Alsbury and Drake Bowen's presence. But we started to see late in the year, I mean, he played 41 snaps against USC, 43 against Army, 37 against Indiana, 29 against Georgia, 35 against Penn State. And against Georgia, he had 16 pass rushes, and he had 6 snaps in coverage and 7 snaps playing run defense. But if you look at Indiana, he had 13 pass rushes, 13 run defensive snaps, and then 11 coverage snaps, which most of his coverage snaps come when he's playing linebacker in more of a base set. Yeah. So the only game where he had a big gap where he was primarily a pass rusher as opposed to every down was against Georgia. And I think that part of that I would have to think is about size, because he's still not a real big guy. And when Georgia was going 12 personnel, he was coming out. When they went 11 personnel, he'd be playing in base downs. I think that's where it led to that discrepancy, because then Georgia is a much heavier throw team out of 11 personnel than they are to 12 personnel, which is something Mike Bobo needs to look into, because they got really good tight ends and they should throw more out of 12 personnel. But that was the
Todd
thing.
Monken didn't give him the layout for how to throw out of 12 personnel.
Seriously. But what was interesting about that game is Georgia had some really big tells in 11 and 12 personnel. And Notre Dame would do complete sub-out packages when they would go 12 personnel. They'd go 4-3 personnel. And there was a couple snaps where Notre Dame lined up in like a 50 defense against 12 personnel, because they were so heavy with the run looks out of 12 personnel and certain play action things. And so that led to that being such a huge difference for Jaylen against Georgia, where in a lot of other games, he was pretty balanced run snaps versus pass rush snaps, because I think he was more part of the rotation than he was just a situational player. And so I think we're already seeing that a little bit, Aiden, to be honest with you. Now it's about Jaylen building on that and taking that to another level. And if he does that, look, it's not out of the realm of possibility that Jaylen Sneed becomes a starting will next year. it's not out of the realm of possibility. If he keeps growing and developing the way he did, and then it's Kingston and Jayden are kind of all working, in that, Kingston's playing some Will, playing some Mike. And there could be times where look, Drake Bowen starts at Mike, Kingston starts at Will, but there's going to be snaps in that game where you're going to see Kingston at Mike and Jaden Osbury or Jaylen Sneed at Will. Because I think Kingston, my prediction will be a little bit of both, play both. Because I don't know who the natural Mike would be in that rotation behind Drake. If Kingston's starting at Will. Like, could Jaden Osbury do it? Yeah, he could do it, but he's still a 6'1", 220-ish pound guy.
Yeah.
That I don't know that you want him playing a bunch of base down Mike looks against Texas A&M, Georgia, some of those teams that are more balanced in how they go about attacking you. Could he do that against USC? Sure. A different style of play. You could do that more. So I think we'll see Kingston kind of play a little bit of both, and then Jaylen Sneed playing a lot more at Will, maybe even seeing even more of Jaden Osbury playing those two spots. I think that's kind of where I would see that one going. But if you'd have told me a year ago Jaylen Sneed might be your starting Will linebacker in 2025, I'd have been like, no, it's not happening, dude. He doesn't have the feel for the game. He was a much different player second half of the year this year 100%. Than he was first half in that regard, which is why you saw here's his snaps, 31 and 41 the first two games. Then it was 26, 23, 12, 16, 19, 25, 19, 23. And then Kingston got hurt against Army, and his snaps went up. And so I think Kingston's injury led a little bit to Jaylen getting that opportunity. I think he made the most of it. And that's why you saw his snaps stay high even when Kingston came back. His snaps still stayed a little bit higher. 37 against Indiana with Kingston out, but then 29 against Georgia. We talked about that. 35 against Penn State, which we talked about. So, but I still think he's more of a rotation guy than he is the full-time guy. But I think the thing that he brings to the table now is he can be a rotation guy and a package guy. Whereas early last year, he was pretty much just a package guy, light rotation guy. Now I think he can do a little bit more of both.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, he started to get a more well-rounded game, especially towards the latter part of the season. So that it leaves a lot of room for excitement, man. Do I think that he's going to come in, and do I predict him to have the breakout season like some are predicting? No, and that's not really specific to Jaylen Sneed. It's just how he's going to be used in the rotation, what's in front of him. But to answer your question, I don't think it's too late because we've seen it. Now it's just, what is that going to look like in 2025? Because some of it too now with development of players is it's tough to refine somebody's game when they haven't done it in a game setting. Now there's actual footage of Jaylen Sneed being a more key rotational piece guy to where they can start refining his game, not just, hey, man, we're going to try to get you to do this in 2024. You've now showcased that you can. So I think you could see him take a step. I don't know if he's going to have the kind of breakout with the room being as loaded as they are. But I think he's still going to be a very key piece to this linebacking core. I do. Coach Bent 574, who are some non-marquee names that are being misused at the school they chose that you think would be flourishing at Notre Dame right now? Obviously no Keeleys or Bowens, thinking like the Hannafins.
Well, he's had some issues with health. He got hurt early in his tenure, and then now they've kind of moved him around a little bit. I don't know that he'd be flourishing at Notre Dame because I don't know where he'd play right now. Notre Dame was looking at him originally at linebacker, then a receiver. I think he could have helped him a receiver. But didn't he go to Clemson and originally start playing defense, and then he moved to receiver? Like they convinced him to play. If I remember this correctly, they convinced him to play defense when Notre Dame wanted to play offense. So that's kind of that. He could be one. He could have helped them if healthy. He could have helped them in Notre Dame the last couple of years potentially. But again, it's would he been able to stay healthy at Notre Dame compared to Clemson? I don't know the answer to that. Just trying to think of some. I mean, there's a couple guys that the ones that pop my head actually are kind of funny. Are not guys that necessarily chose Notre Dame, chose other schools over Notre Dame coming to high school, but more so some guys at Notre Dame kind of let walk this offseason that you're like, maybe you should have not let that guy walk.
Like,
as we talked about, like Aiden Keanaaina, Nana Osafa-Mensah are two guys that I think could have helped Notre Dame this year a little bit, But I'm just going to kind of look through some of the recent offer lists and just try to refresh my memory. Like they dropped Cedric Irvin. He's a nice player, but he wouldn't be helping Notre Dame. Jade Lamar wouldn't be helping Notre Dame. Just thinking of some of these receivers. Malik Elzy wouldn't have really done a whole lot at Notre Dame. Rodney Gallagher hasn't done a ton at West Virginia. He maybe could help you in the return game. He's not beating out Jaden Greathouse in the slot. Just looking at some of these guys that aren't doing a whole lot at other places that maybe could have helped Notre Dame. Let's see, D-line. Let's see. Play the guys you have. Jason Moore hasn't played a ton at Ohio State. I think he would have had a better shot at working in the rotation at Notre Dame than the others. What?
No, nothing. You're play the guys you have. Yeah, that was. Yeah.
What?
I thought it was funny. You said play the guys you have. I thought you were talking.
Oh,
about
yeah, gotcha.
Yeah,
gotcha. Yeah. So I Coach, I'm sure if I did, I could dive through the scholarship offers over the years. There'd be some that pop in my head, but none that are necessarily jumping out. The other thing too is so many of the young guys that they've landed the last couple of years are playing and helping that I'm not thinking as much about, because 3 years ago, this would have been super easy to answer because I would have like 10 guys off the top of my head that like, man, I wish we had that guy because we're watching Notre Dame like throw some out there on the field. I don't think about that as much now, like, because it's like, oh man, how good would Notre Dame be if they had Peyton Bowen? Like, well, he wouldn't be starting, first of all. I mean, he'd be sitting behind Xavier and a Don Schuler. So it's like, I don't know how much I miss that guy.
Yeah.
So there just aren't as many as maybe I would have had a few years ago. So I think that speaks volumes about where this Notre Dame program is. Some people still want to pretend like this is 3, 4, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, but it's not, because the talent level's much, much better than it's been since then. So see my guy Jack Frencho, nothing like catching you all live from Anagata BVI. Do you know where that is, Trev? Where is that? Are you on vacation? Jack, I'm gonna type that in. Where is that? That is in the British Virgin Islands. Okay, so there you go. I'm looking at these pictures. He's loving life a lot more than you and I are right now from a weather standpoint. There's no doubt about that.
Man.
But yeah, Jack, I'm hoping I'll be enjoying some sun and some beach here in a couple weeks myself. We'll see.
Oh, yeah.
But, we'll see. But good to have you, Jack. Good to have you, my man. All right. Let's get to some more questions here. We got Salty. We'll get one of Salty's question bombs in here. Another one. Here we go.
What will the quarterbacks and wide receivers do over the spring and summer to build understanding, compatibility, and confidence?
Just working together. I mean, there's no secret sauce. It's just working together. It's just getting out there, watching film together, getting out there in the practice field, going over routes together, being able for the quarterbacks to talk to them about how they like routes to be run to a certain degree. Like, hey, man, I really like it when you do this. I like it when you do that. Hey, just so you know, if I see this coverage, this is where I want to put the ball. Those are all things you do just by getting out there and working. I mean, that's really it. And if you're doing it right, you're practicing different things. Like, hey, let's practice bad balls today. Let's practice back shoulders today. Let's practice low balls. I mean, as a position coach, I would do that, Trev. We would do once a week during season, usually on a Thursday. I would have my players get on their knees near sideline, and I'd throw them a low ball, and they would have to catch it and roll. And you work on just kind of when you're diving for a ball, just work on turning your hips into the ground as much as you can, so you're not catching it and then going straight into the ground. Well, you have to practice that. You have to work on that. When I was at Christopher Newport, we would do things during special teams when because I didn't have a lot of receivers on special teams, but the guys that weren't doing special teams, especially when doing like PAT field goal and some of those things where we didn't like PAT, punt block, we didn't have any receivers on that. We'd have someone punt coverage. We'd have someone kick return. So we'd go down there and we'd go to the end zone and we'd work on one-handed catches in the end zone and not doing it like showboating, but like, okay, I'm holding your hand down. You got to do this. This is, this is what they're doing it for. Like, I see these guys just going through drills and doing one-handed grabs. I'm like, you'll never do a one-handed catch like that. You're just doing that to showboat. We would do it more of like going up for a ball, catching a ball behind you where a guy's holding your hand, and then we would make it a competition. I'd go down there and put my gloves on and go make catches with them. And like, hey, can you beat me? It was pretty good. Pretty good hands back in the day. But just a competition. But you're teaching them, why are we doing this? What are we doing this for? But I would have my guys work on that with the quarterbacks during the summer. Like if you wait till fall camp to start working on that stuff, it's too late. Yeah. And so that stuff's all being done in the indoor facility right now, and then eventually during the summer where you're practicing all that stuff. It's just time. It's time together, talking through things. Hey man, what would you do if they're doing this coverage? What are you gonna do if you're doing that coverage? And if you're at CJ Carr or Kenny Minchie and you're asking them that question, you're not necessarily just doing it to test them. You're trying to understand what you're trying to get in their head and understand how they think. And that's going to help you have a better sense of what they're going to do. All that stuff is just being around each other, talking ball, throwing the ball together, sweating together, working together, talking together, all that kind of stuff is all part of that process. And there's no secret sauce to it, Salty. It's just work. It's doing routes on air, doing one-on-ones, doing 7-on-7, doing different drills where you're working on, isolating certain aspects. All that stuff should be part of what they're doing this offseason.
The only other thing that I would add to that is just making sure that they're all doing it as a cohesive unit. Quarterback battles it's tough to navigate for the coaching staff. It's also tough to navigate for players because it's human nature to have like your guy. I mean, Jaden Greathouse has been catching passes from Steve Angeli now for 3 years. And so it's going to be interesting to see how they do it. But one thing that I hope is continuing to happen is it all still remains together. When the quarterbacks are calling receivers to get together, I hope it's not just Steve or just CJ or just Kenny. I hope it is still a collective group effort because one, that'll show me that they're still remaining compatible, building understanding with one another. And the common goal is still, we have to do this regardless of who the starting quarterback is going to be. So Notre Dame is still a good program and gets back to the stage that you want to. So that's the other, that would be the other facet for me. Outside of that, I'm all in line with Brian. ND just means more. If Carr wins the starting job, whose numbers will be better, Fields or Greathouse? If Minchie wins, whose will be better? Which wide receiver benefits most from Minchie winning the job?
I don't think there will be a difference between those two, that much of a difference between CJ and Kenny in regard to who benefits at receiver. I think Kenny and CJ are very similar players. They're very similar athletes. Kenny's just more prone to run, but he wasn't in high school. CJ would run just as much as Kenny did in high school. Kenny's kind of turned into that. They both have great releases. They both have great ball placement. They both get a lot of spin on the ball. I mean, we've talked about this before. Whenever Vince and I would say the ball looks different going that way and it does come back, we weren't just talking about CJ. It was always CJ and Kenny were always beside each other. And then Steve would be down on the other side with either Riley or Gino Gaduli. And it was like, you watch CJ and Kenny throw it, and then you watch Riley and Steve throw it back. You're like, it looks different going that way than it does coming this way. It just does. I think their games are similar. I don't know that either of those guys are going to necessarily benefit significantly more from one guy being in it over the other. From a number standpoint, other than just one guy might be better than the other. So you're naturally going to catch more because that guy's going to complete more, make better reads, or whatever the case may be, whoever wins the job. But I don't think there's a huge difference in style of play between Kenny and CJ as throwers, other than just the degree of goodness. The style of play is similar. I just think CJ has the best overall arm talent that they have, when it includes like the whole mix of it. But Kenny's not that far behind. That's the thing. He's not that far behind. stylistically, though, I don't see a whole lot of difference. Like last year with Riley just didn't like throwing over the middle of the field. I mean, even a lot of the throws that were Jaden Greathouse's biggest plays this year, they were outside. Think about it. The wide open seam route, but just about everything else was outside. Even the first touchdown against Ohio State, he worked out, then came back in on sort of like a reverse pivot route. It wasn't even an over the middle throw. He caught very few over the middle throws outside of stop routes and option routes over the middle of the field on third down. He didn't love throwing over the middle of the field. He just wasn't comfortable with it. I think CJ and Kenny are a little bit more. And so I think Jaden Greathouse would benefit more from both of them, not just one of them in that regard. I think Fields will benefit greatly from any of the quarterbacks. Because like the one thing we've said about Steve Angeli, I have a lot of issues with Steve intermediate and some different things, but Steve throws a pretty deep ball. He'll be willing to throw the ball down the field to Malachi Fields.
Sure will.
That's not a question. I mean, like I said, the best slot fade throw that we saw a Notre Dame quarterback make in the like not in practice or blue goal, but just in an actual game this year was Steve's against Purdue. That was a pretty slot fade that we saw all year to Jaden Harrison. He dropped that sucker over the top on the outside shoulder. I mean, it doesn't get a whole lot better than that, Trev. It really doesn't. Throwing the ball deep won't be Steve's problem. Reading it to get there might be an issue, but like he'll have no problem saying, hey, I'm going to throw this backside post route to Malachi Fields, or I'm going to throw this go ball to Malachi. Steve won't have any hesitancy in that regard. Neither will Kenny or Steve or CJ. So I don't know that there's necessarily any guy that's different between those two. I think that Greathouse, I think the Z position, like Steve likes throwing a Greathouse. We saw that last spring. I think the Z position would benefit a little bit more from Kenny or CJ than will Greathouse. I think Malachi will benefit more from CJ or Steve or CJ or Kenny on the non-vertical stuff because they're better readers and they get the ball a lot quicker and they're more accurate. But Malachi will still benefit more than what we saw from this past season, even with Steve at quarterback. Because again, Trev, I want people to understand this. Our issue with Steve is not that we think he's a bad quarterback. It's not it at all. I think Steve's a good quarterback. I think Steve is a guy that, as I said, you could go 10-2 with this season. I just don't think Steve is a championship. Like, he's not Drew Pine. He's more Ian Book than anything as far as like your ceiling, where you got a good team around him. He can get you 12-0. Just not going to do a whole lot once you get there because of his limitations. That's a good quarterback. You know, I mean, I've said this before. If he goes to Rutgers, they win 2 more. If he's Rutgers quarterback this year, Rutgers wins at least 1 or 2 more games, in my opinion. Because the quarterback, they went 7-5, and their quarterback was not good. Like, I think Steve's a good quarterback. I just don't think he's a championship quarterback, and I think the other 2 kids are. That's all it comes down to. It's not that we think he sucks, he's terrible, he's a bum. It's none of that stuff. It's just, I think his ceiling is a lot lower.
My thing with Steve Angeli is we've just seen it before. We've seen this style of quarterback before at Notre Dame have a lot of success in the regular season. But now that Notre Dame, especially under the Freeman tenure, has gotten a taste of what it's like to go on a playoff run and play in the national championship, when you evaluate the player, and this is at every position, this isn't just at quarterback. Quarterback is just kind of the highlight of the forefront of attention because it's a starting quarterback battle. But Notre Dame is having to make these choices all over the field because you got a taste of what it's like to have a championship caliber insert position group here. And that's how you have to start gauging your decisions when it comes to putting together a depth chart, when it comes to putting together a starting lineup. So that's my whole thing with Steve. If this was 2019 and you take this version of Steve, this team's probably going to win 10, 11 games in the regular season.
They don't lose to Stanford in 2022 if Steve Angeli of this season was their starting quarterback.
Sure don't.
I don't think they lose to Marshall in 2022 if this version of Steve Angeli is your quarterback. I just don't think that you beat USC. Still don't beat USC. You still don't beat Ohio State. That's the thing. Right? If Steve Angela's starting quarterback, I'd still expect them to go 2-0 to start the season. I just say once they get to the playoff, they're going to be a little limited on what they can do, barring the defense just completely carrying them.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't know why Salty would ask this question. Like, what do you think we're going to say when you ask this question?
which
I just
wide
had
receiver?
To bring it up anyway.
No, it's when I went through and I started, and I was like, I wonder who Salty thinks it is.
Yeah, we already know who he thinks it is.
Which wide receiver will lead this season in receiving or in receptions, yards, and touchdowns? It is perfectly fine to answer the great one for all three.
I actually do think it's Jaden Greathouse in 2 of those 3. I do think that Jaden Greathouse will lead the team in receptions and touchdowns. I think Malachi Fields leads the team in yards, and he'll be slightly behind Jaden Greathouse in catches. I think it could go either way. I do actually think Jaden Greathouse will lead him in touchdowns. He's just he's just a guy that's good at scoring touchdowns when he's a focal point of the offense. Just is. Mm-hmm. Just always has been. And I think we'll see that next year as well. Yeah.
Yep. I'm on board.
So I'll say this, Salty. My answer to you is Greathouse on all 3. Salty, do me a favor. Put your headphones down for a second. I want to answer this question for everybody else. And I don't want you to get mad at me, Salty. I want you to get mad at me. So, yeah. I'm going to bring – there's a question that just came up at the bottom. I'm going to bring it up now because it's related to what we were just talking about, the quarterback. So I think it's kind of relevant to stay on topic with that. So I'm going to bring this one up here right here from JC Bodie, Trev. And I'm going to read it. I'm going to get your thoughts first, and then I'll answer. But he asked, do you think CJ or Kenny is a championship quarterback this year, meaning this upcoming 2025 season?
I mean, for me and Brian, your answer could be different. I think both have the potential to be. But the way that I evaluate quarterbacks, and I would have the same answer if you asked me this of Steve Angeli, it's just I need to see them play more. I do. Like I think I think CJ and Kenny have all the potential in the world. But I need to see them, one, for CJ, I just need to see him play a snap. And then for Kenny, I need to see him play more than garbage time minutes to say this is a championship caliber quarterback. I think they have all the tools to be. I absolutely believe that. But I need to see it. And it's the same thing for other teams. Do I think Julian Sayin is a championship caliber quarterback for Ohio State? Maybe. But I need to see him play first. Do I think Arch Manning is a championship caliber quarterback for Texas? Maybe. I need to see him just not get rotated in the playoffs in a short yardage situation where they're just going to have him run the ball. But for this one specifically, I don't know. I think my answer is they have the potential to be, but I need to see them play. But that is me specifically. Brian, what say you?
I understand what you're saying. And my whole thing is, if we can't talk, this isn't to you, this is to push back to, if we can't talk about certain things until we see them play, then what should we do shows for the next 6 months? I mean, why are you watching this show on February 21st if we can only talk about things that we know? Because we know nothing about what any football team is going to look like in their current iteration. Every team has a new starter somewhere, a new coach, a new quarterback, a new lineman, a new something that's new. So I don't know what you want us to talk about for the next 6 months if we can't even know anything until we say, look, here's the reality. We don't know how any of these teams are going to look next year in their current forms, especially in today's era of the portal, because who saw Detroit Hunter saw Florida State taking a step back. There's no way you can convince me he saw them going 2-10. You know, it's like we were talking yesterday when I talked about 2016. I said on a national podcast, they're either going to get through all these problems at Notre Dame and be really good, or they're going to implode. But I didn't see 4-8 coming. When I meant implode, I meant like 7-5, 6-6, right? I mean,
yeah. The
whole point is we don't know for sure until we see it. But I still think we can at least have conversations about their talent beyond just, well, I don't know, because we don't truly know. But there is a level of projection that we can make with a lot of these quarterbacks. And the reason that my answer for CJ and Kenny, are they championship quarterbacks this year? My answer is it doesn't depend on, well, I need to see them play first. My answer is more of it depends on what's asked of them. That is really what the concern and question is. If they have to carry the 2025 team the way that Riley Leonard had to carry the 2024 team, they will not be championship quarterbacks because they don't have the experience to be championship quarterbacks in a setting where they have to put the team on their shoulders and carry them to a championship for an entire season. That I don't think they're capable of. The reason that I think both of them are capable of being championship quarterbacks in 2025, however, is because I don't think they will be asked to do that. I don't think they're going to be asked to carry the team the way that Riley was asked to carry the team. They won't be asked to carry the team the way that even Brady Quinn was asked to carry the team or Jimmy Clausen was asked to carry the team. Because as good as Jimmy Clausen was in 2009, they still sucked. Because it's just you need that kind of freaky, mobile playmaker type of Riley Leonard type to put a team on his shoulders that just isn't otherwise as good as it would have been. Now, Notre Dame's not 6-6 if Steve Angeli's a starting quarterback this year. They're not 6-6 if CJ Carr or Kenny Minchie are, but I'm quite confident in saying they don't get to the national championship game if any of those three guys are their starting quarterback. Next year, I feel it a little bit differently, not just because those three guys all have more experience, but the team is going to be different. You're going to have a much more experienced and talented offensive line. You're going to have a much better set of skill players. You now know that what you have at running back more than you did a year ago. Your defense should still be really good. So in that regard, it's kind of like, would Trevor Lawrence in 2018 have been able to carry them to the championship the way he was asked to carry that team in 19 when they lost all those guys from the year before? Trevor Lawrence had to carry 2019 Clemson a lot more than he had to carry 2018 Clemson. The 2018 Clemson was just, don't F it up. I mean, dude, we're handing you a Ferrari. Don't crash it. Where in 2019, it's like, daddy took the Ferrari away and gave you, like a nice car. He gave you like a nice little, I'm trying to think of something that like a nice little, used Mustang. I love Mustangs. So for me, that's a really sweet car. If I had the money to buy a new car, I'd buy a Mustang. But it's not a Ferrari from you know what I'm talking about, right, Trev? I mean, from that performance standpoint. And he had to kind of, meaning you're to win this race without the horsepower of this other car, without this, you got to be able to kind of maneuver it and kind of carry it. Whereas before, it's just like, dude, it's the car's doing all the work. You're just steering it. You know what I mean? Where now you got to be the guy that's doing the turns and the tricks, and you're finding, and that's the difference. Is if they have to carry the team where they got to put the team on their shoulders for an extended period of time, then no, they won't be championship quarterbacks. If it's a game here, a game there, CJ, Kenny, you got a deal today, man, because defense, then I think they can do that at times, just like Trevor had to do that at times in 2018, but it wasn't for an extended period of time. So in that regard, I do think they can. And then there's the context of, what are other top teams going through? There's a comment in there from Andrew, and I'm pushing back on him because I really do like Andrew, and that's why I take the time to respond to his comments. But where I think that he's making a point that's valid is by saying, look, you have to think twice about looking at a team that's starting a new quarterback that's never really played meaningful downs, right? That's fair, but the conversation can't just be about Notre Dame. The majority of the big-time programs of college football that otherwise have the talent to win it all, outside of Penn State, are all starting new quarterbacks this year, including Texas. Oh, Arch has started before. Against who? Like he didn't start against Georgia. When they brought him on against Georgia in the regular season, he didn't look all that great. Who did he start against? He started against Louisiana Monroe and Mississippi State, who sucks. They went 2-10. That's like if CJ would have started against Florida State and they would have won 35-13. That's the equivalent of what it was to beat Mississippi State this year. He threw 2 picks against Louisiana Monroe. That is not all of a sudden, well, hey, because if you're going to say that, then why aren't we talking about Dante Moore? Because Dante Moore started some games in 2023 as a true freshman. We don't know how any of these guys are going to handle being the guy. Yes, Art started 2 games against 2 teams that are terrible in a situation where he knew he wasn't going to be the guy. Eventually, Quinn was going to come back, and he was going to be number 2. It's a whole different animal than all the world is now watching you as the guy. But the fact that so many teams are going through this is almost perfect timing for all of them, not just Notre Dame, because they're not playing a Notre Dame team with a 5th-year senior quarterback. They're not playing an Ohio State team with a 5th-year senior quarterback. They're not playing an Oregon team with a 6th-year senior quarterback. Riley was just a regular senior. I'm just not meaning Riley specifically. I'm just meaning just a veteran guy. Oregon, so I'll just Notre Dame with a senior 3-year starter. Ohio State with a 5th-year senior. Oregon with a 6th-year senior. Georgia with a senior. Alabama with a senior. Yet all these teams were returning starters. All these teams had these returning starting quarterbacks or transfers that had played a lot of football this past year. Now, all those same teams are going to have brand new quarterbacks. So the fact that it happens all at once is why I think you almost kind of have to not put as much stock in the inexperienced quarterback as you normally would, because outside of Penn State, all the top contenders are going through the exact same thing. Right. And I think we you saw enough this past season to be able to kind of say, listen, you've seen enough evidence in recent years of second-year quarterbacks and guys like that stepping into the lineup where you can comfortably say, I think the whole needing to be a junior, senior thing is a little bit outdated. It just in modern football, we've seen a lot of redshirt freshman quarterbacks have a ton of success with teams. Jalen Hurts is a true freshman in 2016, going all the way to the championship game. We saw Trevor Lawrence win a title as a true freshman. We've seen several quarterbacks this past year. Nico as a true sophomore, first year as a starter, leads Tennessee to the playoff. Sam Leavitt as a true sophomore, maybe redshirt freshman, leads Arizona State to a Big 12 title in the college football playoff. We've seen way more of that in the modern game because of the changes in how offenses are run, reads are more simplified. Yeah. Plus, kids nowadays have so much more experience playing football. Because in the past, your experience playing football was your regular season in high school. Now, CJ Carr, as soon as his regular season's over, he's going to this 7-on-7 tournament in December. He's going to this 7-on-7 tournament in February. And they're playing football. It's different, but it's still better than just being on the basketball team or the track team, which is what it used to be. Yeah. So we've seen a lot of that. Your Andrew's example of J.J. McCarthy is a great example, because J.J. was not asked to carry Michigan in 2022 or 2023. But there were times when they needed him to say, we need you to make a play here. And he could do that. Against Ohio State in 23 is a perfect example. Against Bama in 23, perfect example. J.J. didn't have to go out there and throw for 320. But we're going to need you to make about 4 or 5 big plays in this game. We're going to need you with arm or legs. We're going to need you to make those plays in this game. That we're seeing so much more now than we have in the past. I mean, Jameis Winston winning a title as a redshirt freshman. Even going back in the 90s, Michael Vick would be that. But back then in the 90s, it was more of that anomaly, that freak was more of that guy. It took a Michael Vick to do that back in the 1990s. Now it's different. You're seeing that a lot more now of these guys. Like Cam Newton wasn't a young player, but he had never played a meaningful down of Division I college football prior to 2010, and he became a star. So I think we see so much more of that now where you just don't need it. But what separates, and Andrew just talked about DJ Lagway, what separates the team success for DJ Lagway and whether, is DJ Lagway going to be a championship quarterback in 2025? No. Why? Because I don't think he's capable of carrying that team to a championship. If DJ Lagway would have signed with Notre Dame last year and you were asking me that question, I'd say yes, because he's not being asked to carry that team in a way that he'll be able to, like DJ could take a similar team in a couple years a little further than he's going to be able to take that team as a true sophomore. Yeah. That's the difference. And so he may have championship talent, and both of them have championship talent, but the reason I think both of them are championship quarterbacks this season is because of the supporting cast. That's the big thing, Trev, is you can win a championship with them as your quarterback. It may not be because because of them. And we've seen this at Notre Dame recently too. Everett Golson, Deshaun Kaiser, where when the town around you is good enough, a young quarterback can step in and lead you to great heights if the town around you is good enough. And that's the interesting circumstance. And Andrew says the verdict's still out on Nico. That's fair. I don't disagree with that. But he still led his team to the college football playoffs. Why? Not because Nico put the team on his shoulders for a whole season. They had a great defense and a great run game. Nico didn't have to be a star. So that's why you can say verdict's still out on Nico. I think Trevor and I would both agree with you, but he did lead his team to the playoffs this year. Why? Because he didn't have to carry the team. And that's where I think CJ and Kenny are in right now is I think they're both capable of winning a championship at Notre Dame this season as long as they don't have to carry the team in September and October the way that Riley had to carry the team last September and October.
Yeah,
and if Riley had a bad day, they were going to lose. You want an example? Northern Illinois. Riley had a bad day, and the team couldn't win because he had a bad day.
So I do have a question based on this, and this is coming from somebody who also believes that the starting quarterback will end up being one of these two. We've talked about how we believe that it should be one of these two because they are the championship caliber quarterbacks, whereas we believe that Steve would have a good regular season, but maybe once you get to the playoffs, might not be as so. So I just, with this premise in mind, talking about how we believe CJ and Kenny could be championship caliber quarterbacks because they won't have to carry, where does the variance come in with Steve Angeli then, in your eyes?
Because to win a championship, you're still going to need to be that playmaker in those instances. So that's why you go with J.J. McCarthy instead of Cade McNamara. Because Cade can manage you to the playoffs. Already did it. He did it in 21 and 22. But Cade, you were limited with, can you beat Georgia with Cade McNamara? No. Could you have beat Georgia with 2023 version of J.J. McCarthy on 2021 Michigan? No. Could 23 Michigan have beat 21 Georgia? Maybe. You see what I'm saying? So it's like it's you have a ceiling of how far you can go. So like the team will take you certain parts, but like Trevor in 2018, at times, Trev, need you to make some big plays. That's what happened against Notre Dame. Look, there's only going to be 4 or 5 chances where your arm talent's going to have to, like Chase Bryce doesn't hit that seam route to Hunter Renfro that beats Alohi Gilman. He doesn't throw both of those bombs, maybe one. He doesn't throw both of those bombs for touchdowns once Julian Love went out. Yeah. You needed Trevor to make some of those plays because in the first one, Dante Vaughn got a finger on the ball. He tipped the ball. I mean, the coverage was pretty good. It's a great ball. Chase Bryce isn't making that play. So that, could Clemson have gone undefeated that season if Kelly Bryant stayed the starting quarterback? Yes. Are you beating Notre Dame with Kelly Bryant? Maybe not. That's the difference.
Makes sense.
You can get to that. Ian Book's a perfect example. You can beat a lot of good football teams with Ian Book. You can beat a lot of good football teams with Steve Angeli. I don't think you're beating Georgia. I don't think you're beating Ohio State. I don't think you're beating Bama. I don't think you're beating Oregon unless your defense just has a day where you hold them to 13 to 16 points.
Yeah.
Where Riley only threw for 90 yards against Georgia. But go look at the other plays he made. The 30-yard run early that sparked the offense. The 3rd and 7 run where he just outruns their corner to the sideline and then jumps over Malachi Starks. You take that off of the team and you've got a different outcome of that game.
Totally.
That's the difference. That's a great question, Trevor. It's great clarification. That's the difference. And that's why I say Steve's floor is very high. You can go 12 and 10 and 2, maybe 12 and 0 with him. But okay, well, then why can't you win in the playoffs? Because you're not playing Texas A&M in the postseason. You're not playing Miami in the postseason. You're not playing USC in the postseason. You're playing Georgia, Oregon, Ohio State, Bama, Penn State. And that's the difference. Is you still have to have a quarterback that can make those big plays. Yes, it's great that Steve came in that drive against Penn State and hit those check downs and got the ball where he needed to go to. That's not sustainable for an entire game if that's all you're doing. He would have needed to make some of those big plays that Riley made. Now, maybe he could have made it. I'm drawing a dichotomy between what he did in that game and then what Riley did later. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And so that's kind of where I view it is I believe, like, I think Steve I've said this before. If Steve would have gone to Rutgers, let's say he would have left after he got beat out by Riley Leonard and gone to Rutgers. Or let's say Notre Dame's going to bring him in. He knows he's going to start. You know what, man, I'm a junior now. I want to start. And he would have transferred to Rutgers. I'm telling you, dude, with that running back and that defense, I've no doubt in my mind that a 7-5 team turns into an 8-4 and 9-3 team. No doubt in my mind, because he's better than that kid. He is a Power 5 quarterback. He's not a championship quarterback unless your team is just so loaded that you can win just like 2009 Bama. With all due respect to Greg McElroy, he was in don't F this up mode as a quarterback. I mean, look at, like, I got so mad one time, Trevor, because I was listening to a broadcast, an ESPN broadcast, and it wasn't even McElroy wasn't on it, so it wasn't like they were trying to give love to the play-by-play guy, you know. And I actually I think you know this. I actually like Greg McElroy. I think he does a really good job in a lot of ways. With, like, yeah, Alabama. He said that Greg McElroy outplayed Colt McCoy, and I was like, Colt McCoy threw 2 passes in that game. They were winning 6-0 when he got hurt, first of all. Second of all, Greg McElroy went 6 of 11 for 58 yards in a game that Alabama won 37-21. He outplayed Garrett Gilbert, maybe. He averaged 5.3 yards. You know who outplayed him? Trent Green went for 109 yards and 2 touchdowns. Mark Ingram went for 116 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Texas's team rushed for 81 yards. That was the difference. All right, like, that's different than what Tua had to do in 2018 or what Tua had to do, Mac Jones had to do in 2020. Or, you know, there's a difference between, dude, we're handing you the keys to the Lambo. Don't crash it. That's your only job. Don't crash it. The engine's already been built for you. The paint job's been already put on. Everything is already go. You got this masterpiece. Don't screw it up. And that's the difference. That's the difference. And somebody said Greg outmanaged Colt is what he meant, and being sarcastic. But, like, even then, it's like he didn't even do that because Colt got hurt. When Colt got hurt, they were winning 6-0. So, but yeah, that was my response.
Yeah, it's kind of like Jake Coker on that 2015 Bama team. I mean, he won a national championship throwing for 21 passing touchdowns because Derrick Henry had 28 rushing touchdowns and 2,200 yards.
But even then, the offense struggled, or the defense struggled against Clemson in the title game. They needed Jacob Coker to make some big throws in that game, and he did.
True.
Threw for over 300 yards. So, but he wasn't going. The point is, he wasn't going to do that for an entire season because he would have some ups and downs. Mm-hmm. That game, and some of it was like trick plays. They had the long pass to O.J. Howard on a trick play. I mean, so he was wide open. But he made some. But it's one thing to ask a guy to do that for a game. It's another thing to ask a guy to do what Max Duggan did at TCU in 2022. That's a whole different animal of what you're asking him to do. And so that's where I'm at. I think Steve Angeli could be a playoff quarterback at certain places. I think Andrew just said if he went to Boise State or UNLV, he's a playoff QB. Their QB is nothing special. I agree. They're still not beating Penn State because he's not the type of player to put a team on his shoulders and lead him to that type of victory like a Riley Leonard could be.
Well, that's what's so entertaining about this Notre Dame quarterback competition is Steve Angeli could be a playoff quarterback at Notre Dame. It's just the question is national championship caliber quarterback. That's the varying levels.
Trev, I'm not laughing at you. I just saw Salty's comment. We're handing you the keys to the Lambo. Don't park it in Miami. I texted Stiers last night. I said, hey, man, seriously, did you do this? He goes, I said, did you steal the Lambo? So, look, all I know is you fly to Miami for the game, the play-by-play game, and all of a sudden, next thing you know, is, the Lambo's getting stolen from Carson Beck. I'm just saying, Sean. So,
that's so funny.
Gavin Wright says, do we definitively know he can't? No, of course we don't know that. He can't. We're just giving you a projection based off what I've seen in practice, what I see in games. I mean, all this, it's a progression. It's a projection. I'll say this. I hope I'm wrong. I hope Steve Angeli is a championship caliber quarterback. I'd love to be wrong. That's good for Notre Dame. Just like I wanted to be wrong about Ian Book. I wasn't, but I wanted to be. I wanted to be wrong about Drew Pine's ceiling. I wanted to be, but I wasn't. So do we definitively know he's not? No, we don't. We don't. It says, or just don't want him to. Like, that's the childish part about that response. Like, I didn't see the second part. Do we definitively know he can't? No, we don't definitively know he can't. To act as if we don't want him to be is childish. Why would I root against Steve Angeli? Why would I not want him to be a championship quarterback? A, it's good for business. So just as a business owner, I want Notre Dame to win a championship no matter who the quarterback is. So why would I want him not to be? B, he's a phenomenal kid. This is what I can't stand. I can't stand that type of response. If you want to tell me you think I'm wrong and you think he's a championship quarterback, go for it. There was a guy on our site. His name was Onward to Victory. He hasn't posted in a while. But he would sit there and praise Steve Angeli, and he would argue with people about why he thought Steve was that guy. But he would point to things that he saw in games and Blue Gold game, and he would make it evidentiary argument. It's not one that I found compelling, but he wouldn't say, "Well, Brian, you just hate Steve." Right? Make an evidentiary argument of why you think that is. Don't act like I do. Do I not want him to? That's childish. Because you have no evidence that it's a personal thing with Steve Angeli. And simply saying, I don't think he's that type of quarterback is not personal. It doesn't mean I root against him. That's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Steve has done nothing but give his school. So did Drew Pine. So did Ian Book. So did Pat Dillingham. Just because you've given your all doesn't mean I'm going to lie to you and tell you that I see something that I don't see. That doesn't mean that I would love to be wrong. If anytime I don't think Anthony Knapp's an elite left tackle. If Joe Rudolph is dead set on keeping them there, I freaking hope Joe Rudolph is right and I'm wrong. Flat out. Hope that he's right and he's wrong. But I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that he's this. And for you to say he's better than all of them, though, based on what? I have more evidence that he's not that type of quarterback than you do that he's somehow better than Ian Book. So, again, I love Steve Angeli. I would love to be wrong about Steve Angeli. But I'm also not going to lie to y'all because I like him personally and tell you he's something he isn't. And if you can't handle that, that's fine. That's fair. But that's different than disagreeing with me. And there's some people that disagree with me on Steve, and it's based on their evaluation of him. That's totally fair. You can think I'm wrong and say, I don't think you're giving him enough credit for this, and this. I think this projects to that. He made this throw against Oregon State. I think he can make all the throws in the offense based on this. Cool. Let's see how it plays out, because we all know that you are. That at the end of the day, we're all Notre Dame fans and we want what's best for the program. And if Steve is the best quarterback and he's better than I think he wants to, than he is, then I hope I'm right. Then I hope you're right that he is that guy. At the end of the day, I don't root for CJ Carr or Kenny Minchie to win the job because I like them more. I've had one conversation in my life with CJ Carr. I've had one conversation in my life with Kenny Minchie. It's actually at the airport, by the way, coming home from the bowl game. And I have one conversation with Steve Angeli in my life. I don't know any of their parents. I didn't cover their recruitments. Ryan did. I'm giving you my evaluation of them as players. I can be wrong. Been wrong before. I didn't think Kyron Williams was going to be a stud. He was a stud. But what I grow tired of is when people try to turn this into a personal thing. That's what I get tired of. Because there's no evidence in my history that I'm unwilling to change my mind if a player shows me that he's better than what I thought he was. How I define Kyron Williams now is completely different than how I defined Kyron Williams coming out of high school. I liked Logan Diggs a little better Audric Estime coming out of high school. Who was the better player at Notre Dame? Audric. It's a no-brainer. because the evidence showed me that. I thought Tosh Baker was going to be a really good player coming out of high school. Turned out he wasn't. We're all wrong at times. I just can't stand that the notion that people have of where you take it away from the debate. Let's have the debate. That's fun. Tell me why you think Steve should be that guy. Tell me what you've seen from him that makes you think he'd be that guy. And I'll entertain that debate. We've had people that have done it. But when you jump into that you just don't want him to, you lose me. You lose me. Because now you're basically making this about like I have some personal, I'm a 40-something-year-old man. I have some personal issue with Steve Angeli, so I'm rooting against him. So I'm rooting against my business interests because I don't like Steve. That's basically what you're accusing me of. Like, if he starts, I hope you're right. I hope you're right. Because it's in my best interest as a business owner and in my best interest as a Notre Dame fan. So I've been a Notre Dame fan a lot longer than I've run a Notre Dame website and podcast. I hope he's right. DK's always messing. Steve Angeli hates Mountain Dew. If that's true, then he's done. He's dead to me, DK. He's dead to me. If he doesn't like Mountain Dew, he can't be a championship quarterback. That's it right there. How can you hate Mountain Dew and win? Come on, man. Come on. He's dead to me, DK. He's dead to me. He hates Mountain Dew. He's dead to me. Can't handle it. So Gavin said, I just want him to get a fair shot from the time he committed. That's fair, dude. I'm cool with that. If you're a Steve fan, go for it, bro. Keep rooting for him. Because Steve Angeli's probably the easiest quarterback in the roster to root for. That's fine, and I hope you're right. But don't turn it into something that it's not, my man. That's all I ask for. I can't believe DK said he hates Mountain Dew. If I'd have known that, then it would be personal. Now I am actively rooting against him. I'm totally kidding. Somebody's going to take that and think that I'm being serious. Got one from Andre Tonsel. Let's get back to having some fun here.
If you've had the original 7 conferences, how would you set up the college football playoff? Which would have 14 teams in it? 7 automatic bids, then 7 at-large teams. Would that even work?
Man, okay, so you'd have the ACC, the SEC, you'd have the Big 8 or Big 12, however you wanted to have it. You'd have the Southwest Conference. You'd have the Pac-10. Who am I missing here? You'd have the Big 10, duh. And then what would the other 7? Would that be the Big East? Would be the other 7?
Would it be the Big East?
Because the Big East wasn't around that long. Let me. Who am I missing here? So let's go 1988 college football season. So would the 7th be? If you're listening, would the 7th you count? So there's the ACC, the Big 8, the Big 10. The Big West, no. Mid-MAC, no. Pac-10, yes. SEC, Southwest Conference, WAC, and then independent. So there was only 6 then. So he has to be meaning the Big East. So we'd go into the 90s and count the Big East. Okay, so let's look at it that way. So if you went to that system, which would have 14 teams in it, that's kind of what I would do. I mean, let's be real. Let's try to make it realistic. So let's make an unrealistic world change and then make a realistic prediction of how it would go. Is that fair? Unrealistic world change. They do an equal revenue share of all the TV money amongst the Power 7 conferences. So, the teams in the Power 7. So once that happens, all these teams get together and say, hey, listen, we agree that it's best to break the conferences up because we don't have to be in this big thing. And so we're going to go to the Southwest. We're going to go here. We're going to go there. And so that's how we're going to do it. So the 7 come back. The Big East comes back. And the ACC, SEC, Big 8, Southwest Conference, Pac-10, Big 10, Big East. It'd have to be the Big 12 because a lot of those independents would still want to be in league. So let's go Big East and Big 12, Southwest Conference, all that works out perfectly. All right, so you'd have the 7 conference champions. I still think the Big 10 and the SEC are the heavyweights. So I think what you would do in that circumstance is, even though you have that group, I think ACC or the SEC, the Big 12, or the Big 10 would still carry a lot of that weight. because of their regional dominance. Whereas you look at like the Southwest Conference, for example, Texas was in the Southwest Conference with Arkansas, A&M, Houston, Texas Tech, Baylor, TCU, and Rice, but they didn't have Oklahoma in the league. Oklahoma was in the Big Eight. The Big Eight would have Nebraska, Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Colorado, Iowa State, Missouri, Kansas, Kansas State. Let's throw in some of the later Big 12 teams that were maybe independents or, or Mountain West teams, things along those lines. And okay, that gets them to 12. That's all fine. But like, I think when I look at it, Trev, I think that's kind of where, let's say, give them Fresno and to the Pac-10 or whatever. I mean, that's fine, but you'd still have those 7. I still think you'd have at least 2 from the SEC and the Big 10. So I think maybe then you'd say, okay, well then maybe the ACC and the Big 12 or maybe the Pac-10 might get a second team as well. So now you'd have 11 of those. You'd have a 4, I'd say then 3 at-larges with Notre Dame having their guarantees if they're in. I think what would happen in this scenario is I think what you'd see no more group of 5 automatic bid, because a lot of the group of 5 teams would be in a different league, or the group of 5 would be even subjugated even further below the Big 7. Because some of those group of 5 teams would be in leagues now. If there were 7 of them, it's greater odds that Boise would be in the Pac-12 or the Big 12 or something like that.
Yeah.
If the Southwest Conference is a thing, the Big 8 needs to get more than 8. They're not getting teams from the Southwest Conference. They're going to go get Boise. They're going to go get teams like that. Utah, who back then, where was Utah back in 1988? What league were they in? They were in the WAC. So like Utah, BYU, they'd probably be Big 10 or Big 12 teams, that kind of thing. You see what I'm saying? So Southwest Conference back then was 8 teams. They'd probably pick up, a couple teams that are now Division I that weren't then maybe. So I'd say that you'd still have 7. The Big 4 would kind of maybe get an extra one. ACC, SEC, Big 10, Pac-12, maybe because they're the swingers. But I think you'd see maybe the SEC, Big 10 get 2 extras, and then you'd have 5 at-large, maybe 4 or 5 get extras. I think that's kind of where it would go. There'd be less of a need for the at-larges to a degree because the leagues would be broken up more if there was a TV revenue. Because the whole point of the SEC and the Big 10 pushing for the extra spots is because of the guaranteed money. If the money was now being split up more evenly, then there's no need to push for the extra spots to demand the extra TV revenue. Then you could even get away with just 7 at automatics and 7 at larges, like you said. But I still think there'd be enough of an incentive to guarantee at least a second team. Or what you could say is the next 4 highest ranked teams from those leagues. So whether it's some years it may be the SEC, the Big 10, the ACC, and the Big East are the next 4 highest ranked teams that aren't number 1 in their league. Not the next 4 highest ranked teams, 3 of them are Big 10, 1's SEC, but who is the next highest ranked team from a league? The next 4 get in. So if the Big 10, SEC, say Big 12 and Pac-12 teams all have like their number 2 team is ranked higher than the number 2 team from the Big East, the Southwest, and the Big 8, then those 4 teams get in. Next year, maybe the Big 8 has the second highest rank, that kind of thing. And then that's how you get to 11. Then you have 3 at-larges after that. Could be whatever. So still have those guarantees. So there's a lot of different ways it would go. Where I still think there'd be some incentive to get an extra team in to the postseason. I just don't think you'd have the same push for 4 when you're in a 10-team league or an 8-team league or a 12-team league. The reason for 4 is because you're in a 16 to 18-team league, more so than what it was before. So it's a great question, Andre. Yeah. But that's my dream. If I was football king, Trevor, I've said this before, I would create equal sharing of the TV revenue amongst the Power 5 team. But the power teams would be like 70-ish or some teams. And then I'd say, let's go back to the old conference tie-ins. Let's make this game regional again. Let's play fewer conference games per league, which means more crossover games, which is good for the sport, all that stuff. and then I'd still give you an automatic bid for winning your league. So so now it doesn't matter if you lose to Notre Dame non-conference. You won your league, you're in. You're good. I think that'd be good for the sport, but we won't see it. But man, that'd be awesome. You don't even know you don't even know what I'm talking about at this point in time, do you? Like, what's the Southwest Conference?
I know about it.
Born.
Yeah, I know about it from like history, but I don't know about it from living in it.
Trev talking like I've lived through the Civil War. Like, I mean, I read it in a history book once.
I mean, to me, it is history. I mean, that's what's weird, man. I mean,
it makes me feel so old.
I had my mom's a school teacher up in Elkhart, and we were talking about her class, and I went to visit her in the fall, and they said that they just got done learning about the historical event of 9/11, and I was like, "Oh, wow." I remember I was 4, but I remember the day that it happened. It's like stuff like that. It's crazy. But no, look, here's all I'm saying. For college football, I just want rivalries to be great again, and I want the conferences to make sense. The Big Ten shouldn't have 18 teams or 16 teams or whatever it has. I mean, I miss the Pac-12 days. Like, I remember back when Oregon had Marcus Mariota and all them, Stanford was really good. They had, that was a fun conference to watch.
The funny thing is the Pac-12 started all this. They were the ones that tried to poach Texas back in 2011 and form the first super conference. They tried to poach Texas and Oklahoma back in 2011. Jack Swarbrick had a big role in stopping that. So it's kind of ironic that the team that really tried to start that to this degree is the one that was the first big one to die. I find that kind of ironic.
That is weird.
Yeah. Good questions. And you guys are really killing it today. You really are. Doing a great job today.
Ballpeen Shillelagh, how often is it that different quarterbacks gel with different receivers? I'm curious if Steve, Kenny, or CJ is the starter, how different the number of receptions would look for different guys.
We talked a little about this earlier. There's always going to be some difference. I don't want to sit there and say that it's going to be identical, but I just don't think there's going to be a real big change going from one to the other. I don't feel like there is Jaden Greathouse is going to go from 30 catches to 60 because of one of those three as a starter. He may go from 40 to 45 or 50 to 55 or 50 to 60 because one guy just likes throwing in the slot more. They just have that connection, like that Stockton Malone type of connection where it's just like, dude, I just know where he's going to be all the time. But I think overall, I don't see there being a big difference between those three. The big difference is between Riley's preferences and theirs. I think they're all more in the same kind of wheelhouse, and that's based on what we saw in the spring. That may not be what we see in the fall, but I can only base off what we've seen, and what we've seen in the fall is that. Yeah. I do know Steve loves throwing to Jordan Faison. We did learn that in the bowl game.
Sure did.
That's the one guy that may see a big jump, but I don't know that he won't see a jump under the other guys. That's the only thing I don't know. But we do know it was Steve.
I think it's also tough to say, too, with this being year 2 in Mike Denbrock's offense and really year 1, it's year 2 in terminology and formations, but we're really going into like year 1.5 and what he wants to do on a down-to-down basis schematically. So I think that is going to play a role as well. Not just – quarterback is a role as well because you do have go-to targets. I get that. But I think year 1.5 in Denbrock's what he wants to run is also going to play a factor in what receivers get ramped up in production. Because, again, and I've said this a lot this offseason. Brian said it a lot this offseason. Tight end, I think, is the one position that people have kind of forgot about in this mix. So I think tight ends are going to become more involved. I think you're going to see more receivers get involved than just having a 1-2 punch. I think they will still have a 1-2 punch, especially once you get to that big game. It'll be a Malachi Fields, Jaden Greathouse type. But especially through the regular season, it would not surprise me if the tight ends were up there in those numbers as well. John Long, I feel like Joe Rudolph's decision-making and Al Washington's defensive tackle recruiting may have cost Notre Dame the championship. Thoughts?
No. Because at the end of the day, however we feel about Joe Rudolph's decision making, by the time they got to the championship game, he had the line on the field that he should have had. Jagasaw left tackle, Rocco at guard, Shoutout at guard, Pat Coogan at center because Craig was hurt, and Emil at right tackle. Like, that's pretty much what the starting lineup should have been if Jagasaw doesn't get hurt.
Yeah.
And Joe Rudolph makes better decisions. That's what it would have been. And I just no. I don't. I think it's a concern about moving forward more so than it is in 2020, 2024. Al Washington's defensive tackle recruiting. Look, Al Washington could have recruited as many studs as he wants. I don't know how many of them would have been playing to beat Ohio State. I don't.
Yeah.
You know, if they would have landed every good D tackle recruit that we thought that they wanted, I don't know that those guys are going to step in December and January and be stars as true freshmen or true sophomores. Maybe. I think if you want to be critical about Washington, I'd say how he's developing the younger D tackles is a legitimate concern. But again, if what cost Notre Dame the championship was Ohio State was better than them on that day. But the other part of it, John, is we're not complaining about Al Washington's coaching or recruiting right now. If Riley Mills and Howard Cross and Boubacar Traore and Jordan Patel don't all get hurt, and none of those injuries had anything to do with anything that Al Washington's done.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were to say, hey, Brian, let's talk about Joe Rudolph's decision-making. You pro or you think it's been good? I'd be like, I have a lot of criticisms. Hey, Brian, let's talk about Al Washington's need to recruit defensive tackle better. And we're actually going to talk about that in our Monday RTCF show. You guys are going to love the topic that Sean and I are going to do. We're going to discuss, has Notre Dame completely closed the gap? And if not, what are the positions where they haven't closed it yet? It's going to be fun. I'll give you a little teaser. D tackle is going to be in that conversation, right? I mean, it is. But at the same time, if he would have just had a healthy line of what he had this year, I think Notre Dame wins a championship. That's a guess. I don't know that for a fact. But I just feel like with Boubacar and Riley Mills and Botelho and Howard Cross all being as healthy as you can be at 16 games, meaning Howard Cross isn't dealing with a legitimate major injury that's kind of slowing him down, just normal bumps and bruises, like Ohio State's D-line had normal bumps and bruises. They weren't as fresh on January 20th as they were on September 20th. But, just that normal, then I think Notre Dame wins that game. I don't see them jumping to a 31-7 lead. I think when Notre Dame would have figured it out on offense, it'd have been 21-7. Well, I feel pretty good about coming back from that once that offense got rolling. So I think both of those areas are areas where we can be critical of the coaches. I don't think either one of those kept them from winning a championship in 2024. They are areas that need to be better for future potential championship runs because you don't have Riley Mills on your team who you inherited, or Howard Cross on your team who you inherited, or guys like, like a lot of guys that you inherited that were recruited by other coaches. Josh Burnham and Junior Tuilamaka were recruited by who? Marcus Freeman. So Boubacar Traore was primarily recruited by Chad Bowden. So that's a legitimate question and concern. I'm just not going to sit there and then take the jump to that next thing and say they're the reasons they lost in 24. Maybe 25, they might be things that hold them back. That's a different conversation for a different day. But no, if those guys just had healthy lines and nothing else changed except health, I think Notre Dame wins the championship. Well, that should be D-line because I think they needed injuries on the O-line to finally get the lineup that they should have had, to be honest with you. But, I think Sam Pendleton's a different player if he's playing next to Charles Jagasaw as opposed to Anthony Knapp because, Jagasaw had more experience and he had started a game and was a second-year player and stuff like that. But then all of a sudden, okay, Sam's not getting it done. Let's put Rocco back in there and they're fine. Yeah. If Jagasaw doesn't get hurt. So just with good health, those things we're having a different conversation about the effectiveness of those coaches, even with the decision-making and recruiting failures. It's the future that's more of the concern for me.
I'm with you.
Good question, John.
Absolutely. It was a really good question.
Yep. All right. Let's get somebody we haven't had yet. Here we go. RJG Irving. We'll get somebody new.
If Notre Dame had to join a conference for playoff and TV contracts, where would you put them for the overall good of college football?
If Notre Dame had to join a conference for playoff and TV contracts, where would you put them for the overall good for college football? Well, I'm someone who doesn't believe so not what's good for Notre Dame, because what's good for Notre Dame is joining the Big Ten. That's what's best for Notre Dame if it's just about TV contracts, because that would give them the biggest amount of money. But if it's about what's best for college football, then I'd say putting them in the ACC is the best thing for college football, because Notre Dame joining the ACC would be the thing that would allow the ACC to survive.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the ACC dies if Notre Dame joins it as a full-time partner. Now, that's not enough for me to convince Notre Dame to join. Like, if they die, like Ivan Drago, if he dies, he dies. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, it's kind of heartless, but if the ACC dies because of their own decision-making, then they die. I'm not sacrificing independence for them to survive.
No.
But if they passed a rule tomorrow saying, look, you can't be in the playoff without being in a conference, I would want Notre Dame to do one of two things. A, start your own freaking conference, or B, join the ACC.
Yeah, I'm with you on joining the ACC. What would you name the conference? Just to have a little fun. If Notre Dame started its own conference.
That's a good question. I mean, I'd say let's bring back the Big East. Because I want to do something like American, but that's already kind of there. There's a lot of things you could kind of look into. I hadn't really thought about what a name would be, but yeah. It's something like Northeast Conference. I know actually there is a Northeast Conference already for basketball, but because I'd want them to go after, if the ACC is going to die, okay, then I'm going to help it die. Hey, BC and Pitt and Syracuse and Louisville. Why don't we? I mean, it would be that. It's like, hey, let's bring the Big East back, and Notre Dame will be the linchpin behind all that. So now Virginia Tech and a lot of those old Big East teams, Louisville, Pitt, Syracuse, would have a place to go. Now, some of those Big East teams are already in other leagues. You've got USF is in the AAC, West Virginia's in the Big 12. Maybe they come back someday, but you'd have enough of those old school Miamis, and because if the Big East is going away, and then you could say, hey, Florida State, you want to be part of this thing too? You could do something like that. But some of those teams would want to join the SEC, or a lot of the old ACC teams would probably join the Big Ten. Like North Carolina would probably want to join the Big Ten and all that. But the Big Ten wouldn't want some of those teams. And so Notre Dame could then take those teams and go start their own conference and say, we're going to bring the Big East back, and go about it that way. But the more realistic one would be join the ACC and help the ACC survive, because I think they could do that. Man. So that's a big reason why ESPN picked up the ACC contract, is because of Notre Dame. Mm-hmm. Imagine if they were a full-time partner. I mean, what did we read? The payout, they said an all-time record in payouts in 2020, TV payouts, because of the additional TV revenue that they got, partly because everybody was stuck at home, but also partly because of Notre Dame. So, yeah, it's good.
MT41, Brian, before the national championship, you were about to give your thoughts on Jack Sawyer, but you said you'd wait until after the game. Curious to hear your thoughts on him.
Yeah, I'm not a big Jack Sawyer fan. Let's just leave it. Let's just put it at that. I think he's a good player, but he's a little overrated. I think he gets, again, he's not a bum. He doesn't suck. He's a good football player. I just think he's a little bit overrated, in my opinion. I don't think he's always at his best in the biggest moments. I think you watch how he played against Penn State this year and against Michigan this year, and I don't think he played very well against Notre Dame. The game where I thought he maybe had his best game in a big moment was probably against Texas. He actually was pretty, even before the fumble return, he was pretty good against Texas, even before that. But what's my knock on Texas, Trev? They're soft. Mm-hmm. Like, I think you said this to me. Maybe it was D. Trollhunter texted me this and said, you notice how, like, of the three teams that have canceled spring ball already, it's like two of them are teams we accuse of being soft. It's not a coincidence. The other one is a team that has no idea how to win a close game in Nebraska. No idea. It's like, it's not a surprise that those are the teams that are the first ones canceling spring ball. Soft is as soft does, right? I mean, that's the reality of it. But I just, if I could pick one D end off Ohio State's team, it ain't gonna be him. He might not even be second. I'm just gonna be honest with you. I'll just leave it at that. If he wasn't a 5-star recruit coming out of high school, we'd be looking at, hey, he's a good football player. He's a good football player. But we wouldn't be hyping him up the way that he got hyped up, in my opinion. I heard analysts talking more about him than JT, and I just don't think he's a better player. So, yeah, but that's what I'll say. I'll leave it at that. And I actually was a little bit disappointed in JT's play this year, but I still think he's a better player, and I think he's more of a clutch player. It's more of a money player.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the plays he made against Penn State in the second half of that game were just stupid. And like the year before, he was a monster in the fourth quarter against Penn State.
Mm-hmm.
He made huge plays late in the game against Notre Dame. Do you remember Jack Sawyer's name being mentioned at all in the 2023 game against Ohio State? I don't.
No.
So, yeah, I'm just not a fan. I'll just leave it at that. I'm not a big fan. Not a big fan.
Isaiah Lehman, if you could add one offensive and one defensive player from other colleges to this Notre Dame team, who would it be? No Buckeyes.
No Buckeyes. I love it.
I was about to say, well, then there kind of goes my. Okay.
But if I can't do that, then I'd say, okay, Ryan Williams.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be if I could just add Ryan Williams. If Notre Dame's receiving core next year is Ryan Williams, Jaden Greathouse, and Malachi Fields. Okay. Let's have some fun. I'd actually have to ask. This next question might be better suited for someone like that covers the draft, because I'd be like, name me a really stud up and coming edge player. I'd probably go like Dylan Stewart, from South Carolina, somebody that just lines up on the edge and is just a monster at defensive end. That would probably be it. Or like a stud D tackle would be somebody like. Actually, let me just do this here. Way too early. 2025 college football All-Americans. I've seen a couple of those lists, but it'd be some, and I'd have to go through it and kind of think through who some of those guys are. But give me some kind of stud defensive tackle. Like I know it's tempting to like Caleb Downs, and like I wanted it a position where, it's a position where it's more dominant, like maybe an LT Overton or a Peter Woods from Clemson, just a real stud 3 technique. Or a stud edge like Dylan Stewart would probably be where I would go. Because I'm like, Notre Dame's loaded its linebacker. They're loaded there. And I'd probably lean towards the D tackle, because I think Notre Dame, if they're healthy, is going to be pretty good at defensive end next year. But it's just, if you're to tell me, okay, do you guys want TJ Parker? There's a lot of other good ends. I'd be like, yeah, sure, bring him over. But I kind of like where they're at. But if you said, okay, you have Dylan Stewart, I'd be like, okay, yeah, sure. I ain't turning that one down. But D tackle, so that's why I'd say like a Peter Woods, an LT Overton, somebody like that would be where I would want to go on defense.
On offense, I'll take Ryan Williams. On defense, I'll take Zane Durant.
Ooh, that's a good one. That'd be a good one. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. So I would, yeah.
I'd hear out offers for denied Dennis Sutton, but overall, Zane Durant. Because everywhere else, I would take Notre Dame's lineup.
If you were going to give me a defensive end, I'm taking Dylan Stewart. He's an unreal good player. But I like the Zane Durant at D tackle. That's along the lines of what I'm saying, like with Peter Woods at Clemson, with LT Overton at Alabama. Give me a really stud interior guy to go with everything else they have. And, I mean, boy, that'd be a lot of fun. But you said, who'd you say on offense? You said Ryan Williams also?
Ryan Williams. Yeah, because that guy's just –
he's a dude. Because you can't have Jeremiah – and honestly, I think with who Notre Dame has, Ryan Williams might be a better fit for Notre Dame's personnel, because you've got Malachi to give you that tall, long, vertical guy. Not that he's better than Jeremiah Smith. I'm just saying, like, you have that solid play. What you don't have is somebody like Ryan Williams. And then you have Jaden Greathouse working in slots. That'd be fun.
Yep.
That'd be a lot of fun. Here's a question. Tom said, who would you consider the top must-have recruits for the 26 class? Tom, I'm going to eventually get to this, but right now there's going to be a little bit of a shakeup, I would imagine, with Notre Dame's board, since you're going to have a new recruiting coordinator and a new GM. So it's a little bit early to have that conversation. I didn't want you to think I'm just ignoring it, but give me a couple weeks to dig in and find out, okay, who are you? Is there any changes to the board? We'll have some discussion on this, but this will also be something that we'll first put on the premium board and have a breakdown on that before we would do it on the show. But then we'll eventually kind of bring it onto the show. But like right now, like, let me see who the recruiting director is first. Let me see Mike Martin on campus more than 3 days, and then I'll have a better sense of what the board looks like now. Because I can tell you, hey, you got to have this guy. And then the new staff, the new D coordinator be like, but I don't like that guy. We're not going to recruit that guy as hard. And the new recruiting coordinator may say, hey, we're not going after that guy as hard. I could say, hey, go after this running back. And then you're like, yeah, but Jawan Sider's not recruiting that guy. So just let me, I could give you a list. It'd be for clicks. That would be it. But let me just see what the board shapes up to be before I give you that list. But we'll get it to you guys at some point in time, I promise.
Rocket 25. What would you think about scheduling a home and home series with Oregon? I think it would be great, and it would help Notre Dame's strength of schedule, which I think has been kind of light since the latter part of Brian Kelly.
We agree to disagree on the strength of Notre Dame's schedule the last couple seasons. I don't think their schedule has been as soft as people make it out to be. I don't think their schedule this year was soft. Kind of light. Again, kind of light simply because of circumstances that were outside of your control. Mm-hmm. You've got A&M on the road, USC on the road, Florida State at home, Louisville at home. You anticipate that being a challenging schedule. You couldn't have anticipated Florida State would go from 13-1 to 2-10. And USC is going to go from 11-3 and a game against Utah away from being in the college football playoff. 2 years ago, if USC beats Utah in the Pac-12 title game, they're in the college football playoffs. And Ohio State is not. And 2 years later, they're 6-6 and can't win a close game. I mean, I don't know how you can control that. So I don't think the schedule's been light. But even with that, I still don't think the schedule's been light. They beat 4 teams in the regular season that were ranked when they played. Like, that's the thing. They beat more ranked. I think there's only one team this year that had more wins over teams that were ranked when they played than Notre Dame. But but Army and Navy. Well, okay, but what does that mean? Army and Navy's better than Kentucky. I watched Navy beat Oklahoma, who beat Alabama. I mean, I'm just making the point that, like, these teams aren't your typical Army, military teams, just like this wasn't a typical Florida State team. But to answer the other part of the question about Oregon, I have no interest in scheduling Oregon, to be honest with you, Trevor. I don't know that Notre Dame gets a lot out of it. Yes, if you beat them, it's great. But if you lose to them, it's like, do you really want to give them that kind of platform? I don't. I don't like that program and how it's run. I don't like their head coach. I don't like Phil Knight. There's a lot I don't like about Oregon outside of I do think some of their uni combinations are sweet. So I don't really like Oregon. I wouldn't want to platform them in that way. Just my opinion. But there'd be other teams that I would want to play. However, if you don't have the disdain that I have for Oregon, I could completely understand you thinking this would be a great home and home. And I would imagine I'm in the minority in that view of not wanting to play Oregon. But it's beyond just football for me a little bit, which I don't really want to spend a whole lot of time talking about because it's not really relevant. It's more of a personal thing.
I think there's just some teams that I would rather see Notre Dame just play in the postseason, if I'm being 100% honest. Like, scheduling a home and home with Oregon wouldn't do a whole lot for me. I think the risk is higher than the reward, if I'm being honest. It's the same reason why, as fun as it would be to have the narrative of Brian Kelly coming back inside of Notre Dame Stadium if they scheduled a home and home with LSU, I don't really, outside of that factor, it doesn't do a whole lot for me. If they meet in the postseason, great. If it's something where LSU has to travel back up to South Bend in a home playoff game, I would like that. But I don't need it on the regular season schedule. Like, I view it in a similar light. Now, there's some that I think that could advance your program forward, because then it's, well, Trev, what about Ohio State? And look, Brian has said this before. I am under the same belief that if you're going to be the best team in the country, you have to be the best team in your region first. And so far, Notre Dame has not been able to best Ohio State. That would be something where I wouldn't be opposed to it in the regular season. But there's just some opponents that I think would be better off if Notre Dame played in the postseason, and Oregon is filed under that for me.
And Ohio State would make sense because it's regional. I don't have any interest in having a rivalry with Ohio State. If you're going to schedule a Big Ten team that's a premier Big Ten team, I'd rather see Penn State or Michigan, because there's history there with Notre Dame. There's no history with Notre Dame and Ohio State. Prior to the last 3-year stretch, they only played each other like 5 or 6, 7 times, and most of those were played back in. I mean, people say like, well, Notre Dame hasn't beaten Ohio State since the 30s. Well, they'd only, prior to 2020, they only played 3 times. I mean, it's like you played in 05, you played
15.
in 15. That's it. You know, it's just, there's no history there. There's history with Penn State. There's history with there's history with Miami. There's even some history with Alabama. I'd rather play a home and home against Alabama than I would Oregon, because they have played in some big epic games. The 73 Sugar Bowl comes to mind. You know, you think of not just playing in the 2012 title game and the 2020 title game, but Lou Holtz had a home and home, I believe, with Alabama his first 2 years at Notre Dame. They played Alabama a couple times, beat number 10 Alabama in 1987. So there's just Texas. There's history there. So there is no history with Oregon. There's nothing in it for Notre Dame to play Oregon. So so you're saying don't play hard games. It's a nonsense takeaway from what we just said. That's literally one of the most ridiculous things I've seen in a long time. To me, it's got to mean something. The game's got to me, if you're going to play a top team, there needs to be something, a storyline behind it. There's got to be some tradition wrapped into it. There's nothing that Notre Dame gets out of beating Oregon that they wouldn't get out of beating Alabama. So why not play that team? But you don't need to platform Alabama. They're already there. I want Oregon to remain that spunky team that always just trying to be a blue blood but isn't, because they've never won. They're not a blue blood. They're a team that's trying to ascend, and I'm not going to try to give them that platform to ascend like you did Clemson in 2015. So it's a lot about that. Somebody asked me, I was at the 05 game. I was not at the 05 Notre Dame Ohio State game. That was before I started covering the team. I started covering the team in person until 2010. All right.
Zach 30.
Sorry, accident.
Zach 32. Does it feel like the USC rivalry has lost some of its juice that it had years ago?
I don't think so. I don't think it's lost juice. What I think it has lost is there haven't been the marquee matchups. The rivalry still means a lot to me. I still get fired up about playing USC every year. Even when they're not good, they still kind of concern you because it's still USC. And the more you kick their butt, the more you're like, that's just payback for 02 to 09 when you got dominated by USC. Not only did USC beat them 8 straight years, but they annihilated them. I think the only close game they played was like what? The 09 game where Jimmy brought them back and they only lost by a touchdown.
That in 05.
I think. And 05, yeah. I mean, they were the 06 game, they got destroyed.
Oh, bad.
I mean, it was just, it was so ugly. I mean, the 02 and 03, a couple 38-0 wins in there. 02 USC won 44-13, and 03 they won 45-14, and 04 is 41-10. Then you had the close game in 05. Then it was 44-24 in 06, and it wasn't that close. 7 and 8, you had back-to-back 38-0, 38-3 wins. By the way, the first Notre Dame game I was ever at was that 07 game where they lost 38-0. At least they got a field goal the next year and lost 38-3. Then 09, it was close. And then Notre Dame won the next game, and Notre Dame has now won 10 of the last 14 against USC. But this rivalry's always been kind of cyclical like that. Prior to USC winning the 8 in a row, they had tied 6-6 from 96 to 01. But from 83 to 95, Notre Dame never lost to USC and only tied once. That was in 94. From 83 to 93, they beat USC every single time, tied in 94, and then won again in 95. But then before that, USC had won, that's 11 of 13. And before that, Notre Dame had a stretch of win. I mean, so there's always been a little bit of this to the rivalry where there's stretches where one team's more dominant than the other. That's part of it. But even recently, we've seen a couple games where they were both ranked, and there was a big moment. I mean, Notre Dame had a shot to keep USC out of the playoffs in 22. Couldn't do it. And they needed Utah to handle that. USC's had chances to knock USC could have maybe knocked Notre Dame out of the playoffs this year. Tried to played a great game. It was a great game. You go back to the 2023 season. I mean, USC was ranked in the top 10 when they played. It was still a big moment, big game at the time. They ended up not being that good, but you have to ask yourself how much of that was what Notre Dame did to them. Were they just, I mean, Caleb Williams is never the same after that game. Was that just kind of always going to happen, or was it that Notre Dame just kind of got in his head? And then they showed the blueprint for the rest of the teams that they played of this is how you defend USC. I don't know, but I still think the rivalry for me brings a lot of juice. Being in that stadium when they play at Notre Dame, it's still a lot. It's still very electric. So I think it has a lot of. I think it still has the juice.
Oh yeah.
I wish more ranked games like in the 90s when Lou Holtz was beating USC every year. Almost every time USC was ranked. 1988, it was number 1 Notre Dame at number 2 USC. I mean, you still had a lot of that, but it just. I mean, that's the thing that sucked is there haven't been as many of those good matchups as there used to be.
Yeah, I still think it has very much of the juice. I mean, Notre Dame's, the majority of their postseason appearances has weighed in the balance of them winning it at USC, the final game of the year, 2012, 2018, this past season. I think that's a lot of fun. Yeah, I don't think for it to be a good rivalry, it doesn't have to be back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. I mean, Ohio State beat Michigan 14 years in a row. And I don't really think anybody was like, I think the rivalry game is losing its juice. I get where you're coming from. If there is something that I do think lost its juice a little bit, I think some USC fans have. I don't think Roger Dodger has, and some from what he's talked about in the chat. But I don't think it's as much of that because I've said this before. I think that LA is a very fair weather football city. I don't think that's USC's fault. It's like that with their professional sports teams. It's like that with the other colleges around there. So no, I don't think it's lost its juice. I still very much enjoy it.
And the great thing about a rivalry like that, as long as one of the teams is good, it still matters because you have a chance to knock your rival out. And that's the difference. And that's kind of what makes it fun, Trev, is that. I mean, in 1964, Era's first year at Notre Dame, they were undefeated until they went out to USC and lost 20-17. Well, that was a good USC team, but it wasn't an elite one. USC went 7-3 that year. But what made USC's season was beating Notre Dame. They played Ohio State that year and lost. There's been plenty of those kind of years where like you have a shot to beat your rival, and even when you're not necessarily great, and that's what makes a rivalry fun is you don't even have to be that good to necessarily have an impact on the game and to have an impact on the rivalry and the history of the rivalry is it doesn't always have to be okay. They're ranked and you're ranked and all that. It's like sometimes part of the fun is like, man, you remember that time when our team was good but not great, and we went out there and ruined their season, like UCLA has done to USC multiple times the last 20 years. And that's kind of part of what makes the rivalry fun, Trev, is that right there. And 1970 with Era, Notre Dame was undefeated and they got to play USC, and it's a USC team that had already lost 4 games and tied another, and if Notre Dame wins, they got a shot to play for the title, and they got beat. Got beat by USC. So that happened a lot with Era. Somebody in the chat said Era struggled with USC. He did. He was like 3-6-1. I think was his record against USC. He also played against USC where I pointed to a couple games where they weren't that good, but there was also some years where USC was really good. But Yeah, but that's what makes the rivalry great is, there's times where Notre Dame was really good and USC wasn't, and USC knocked them off, and then vice versa. Or like this year, almost knocked them off and played in a great game. So does USC play as hard as they do against Notre Dame this year if it's not a rivalry? I don't know. I kind of have my doubts. I think it adds fuel to it. So
mm-hmm. I think USC is also one of the teams that kind of helped turn Notre Dame's program around, like the win over USC in 2017. I mean, they were coming off of a 4-8 season. Like, they beat Michigan State and East Lansing. Like, that was a good win, but it was kind of like you were looking for that signature Notre Dame marquee win, and you have a ranked USC team coming to town. You absolutely boat race them, 49-14. Now, mind you, the Miami game happened a couple weeks after that, but I think that was one of, I have a lot of great times at thinking back to Notre Dame USC games. Some tough ones, but yeah.
Couple more, and then we're going to get out of here, Trev. Here's one from IL Irish 82.
Any chance they name a starter coming out of spring, or will it be a fall camp decision?
There's a chance, sure. And I feel like we're going to get asked this question a lot over the next couple months. There's a chance that someone steps up and is just too good not to name. And we also, I think you agreed with me on this, Trev, when I mentioned this the other day. I think I remember you agreeing with me. Correct me if I'm wrong. We both agree that you don't not name a starter in order to coerce the other two to stay if you know they're not going to be the guy. You be honest with them, and if they want to go somewhere else, then you give them that opportunity. But we also don't know that it's likely that someone will be that much better than the other two in the spring. So we both think that it will go into the fall, but it's certainly possible that someone could just be so much better than the others that it's like, yeah, that's the guy. And then that guy would kind of be named star. But even then, I still think there's a chance they at least say, hey, look, right now, so-and-so has outplayed you guys. So-and-so is who we think's going to start. But we need to see how the summer goes. And because, let's just say that CJ Carr outplays the other two in spring practice. Okay, well, the reason I say CJ Carr is because that's who everybody thinks is my guy who I want to win the job. All right. Would you really name him the starter and then those guys transfer? But what if CJ doesn't play as well in the summer? What if he doesn't perform as well in the summer? What if the first couple weeks of fall camp, he's getting outplayed by the other two in the same number of practices? That's what I'm saying is he'd have to be so much better than the others for me to name that guy the starter, because it's still a limited part of the discussion. Mm-hmm. It's still a limited sample. There's still 25 practices and a whole summer off season where guys got to develop and grow. If Kenny gets outplayed for the 15 practices or Stevens gets outplayed for 15 practices, does that mean he'll get outplayed for the 25 in fall camp? Not necessarily. So it would have to be like a giant gap for me to name the starter, even if it's the guy that I think is the best and will ultimately do the best job. And that's unique to this season, Trevor, because in a lot of other years, I'm like, look, guys, there's a big gap in talent between that guy and the others, so let's just not waste our time with it. Or there's a big gap in experience. Like, come on, we're not going to start freshman Tyler Buckner over senior Jack Cohn. Let's not waste anyone's time with this. Yeah. In this case, I think all three of these young men have an opportunity to earn a job. And unless somebody's just way ahead of the others after the end of spring, I personally wouldn't name a guy, even if we all know who we think it's going to be. I want to see how that guy handles summer workouts. Does he show leadership? Does he keep developing? Does he get complacent? That's how I would want to be.
Yeah, I mean, my answer is going to be the same. Just whenever this gets asked, as long as the team knows, I don't care when I know, if that makes sense. The team can announce it whenever they want to. And it could be a situation like this upcoming season where they never officially named Riley Leonard the starter. They just every week, like they do, release the depth chart the week of the game. And we saw that Riley Leonard was QB1 when everybody just kind of knew. As long as the team has an understanding. I'm not saying that has to be by the end of spring, but as long as the team knows, I don't care when I find out, if I'm just being 100% honest. But is there a chance? Yeah, there is. But to Brian's point, they would have to be miles above the two others in this competition for it to be named out of spring. I'll say that.
I like this one. I want to answer this one before we go.
Ballpeen Shillelagh. It seems that every couple years or so, a Notre Dame coach proves the doubters wrong, at least to an extent. Al Golden and Al Washington were questioned before they were proved. They had the chops. I think there's a
he didn't put a part 2 in there.
Okay.
But the follow-up question would be, who would that be for this year? I hope it's Joe Rudolph. And I hope it's Al Washington. I don't think Al Washington has necessarily silenced all the critics. I think this season went a long way towards that with the job he did with all the injuries. But I don't know that everybody's completely on board. And even the people that think he did a good job question, okay, but he did that with mostly a lot of veterans. Can he, whatever reason you want to justify not being fully bought in yet, there's some people that aren't fully bought in yet. If he has a big year this year with basically all guys who have primarily only played for him, that's the biggest difference. Is Howard Cross played half his career for Mike Elston and half his career for Al Washington. You know, Riley Mills played one more year under Al Washington than he played under Mike Elston. That's it. Javonte Jean-Baptiste only played for Al Washington 1 year. Now, I know he knew him from his time at Ohio State, but he was a linebackers coach, and Javonte was at the end. He didn't coach him directly. And same thing with like Nana. He didn't coach as long. So a lot of these guys, he hasn't coached as long. Next year's off defensive line is guys who have only played for Al Washington outside of 2 transfers at D tackle. I mean, everybody else has only played for him.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, 21, 2, 3, 4. Gabriel Rubio being the only exception because he'll be a 5th-year senior next year. And him and Jason Onye are the exceptions. But they only played 1 year under Mike Elston. They're going to have big year 4 of playing for Al Washington. So it's dominantly his guys. So there's no spin you can put on next year's D-line if they're dominant to take credit away from Al Washington. None. You can spin this year if you want to. Well, yeah, I mean, you know, Riley Mills and Howard Cross were Elston recruits, and then they got this guy and then this guy and the other thing, and Marcus Freeman recruited that guy, Al Washington didn't. And that's fair. That's fine. If you want to take that route, that's fine. But next year, if they do if the D-line's really good next year, you can say, like, he's not a good recruiter if you want to go down that road, but you can't question his development of the defensive line if next year's D-line is really good. So I think there still is some silencing of critics that Al Washington has left in him because of that. My hope is that by the end of next season, there's nobody questioning Joe Rudolph. My hope is by next season, the offensive line plays so well that if you and I get on the show and we're criticizing him, that everybody's like, come on, guys. Now you're just being haters. And they're right. Because there's no way to spin it being a negative. That's my hope. Now, we wouldn't do that because it's not personal. But that's my hope. That's my hope that, like, nobody's like, yeah, okay, we can to degree how, okay, is he Joe Moore or is it, you know what I mean? But, like, we all hope that by next year, those guys are like, yeah, those are 2 of the best in the business at their positions. Because if that's true, this team is going to be incredible. Because those are that's the 2 biggest question marks I have from position coach. Gino Gaduli, I get, but, like, I kind of feel like when you have an OC like Mike Denbrock, you know, I'm not as concerned about it. So, oh, here it is. This was the second part. So he redid part 1 later, and then part 2 was that. So he did put part 2 in there. So that would be it.
Mine is Chris Ash. I hope he proves a lot of the doubters wrong because yeah. Notre Dame's defense is going to hold a big key into their
including
success.
These 2. Including these 2.
That'd be me. Look,
and me. I'm there.
Look, it's for the same light that we've talked about different position battle competitions, like what we talked about. I hope I'm wrong, but I have my doubts. I do. Hiring somebody that was the defensive backs coach for the Raiders when their DBs were not good and was let go, and then was a pro scout for a front office in the Jacksonville Jaguars who were also not good this upcoming season. I have my doubts.
Yes,
I hope
we
I'm
would
wrong.
Love to be wrong.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Love to be. Like, there's a lot of people that had major doubts about Marcus Freeman that were at their height of, see, I was right after Northern Illinois. Like, I think Andrew Gilmore was one of those. But what I love is after the postseason, Andrew came back and said, I was wrong. I was wrong about him. I hope that a year from now, I'm saying that about Chris Ash. I hope I'm saying that about Joe Rudolph. I would love to be able to sit here and say that, because if we are admitting that, Trev, then that means this 25 season is a lot of fun. It's going to be a lot of fun if we're wrong about those guys.
Man.
And I hope that we are. And I hope that we're right about Mike Brown and Mike Denbrock, and we are right about Mike Mickens. That doesn't take a lot of that we're right about Jawan Sider, and that we think, how great of a hire that was. And I hope we're talking about those things are right, and that, but we were wrong about Rudolph to a degree, Washington, and then of course Chris Ash. Hope we're dead wrong on those guys, because it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun, Trev. It's going to be fun.
Sure is.
Last thing real quick, I just want to say this from Salty. He asked about Jason Onya and how impactful he'll be. Let me see how he is in the spring. I mean, with what I know that he's kind of dealing with and going through, I just need to see him in pads. And it's not like a young guy that hasn't played before. There's some stuff that's not football related going on. I just need to see the young man out there running around and see what he's like. That'll be a much better post-spring question. So I just didn't want you to think I was dismissing that one. And then I wanted to read this from JP Buellsfeld Financial Services. I just want to sincerely thank you for your shows, especially the 4+ hour shows. When I'm working late at the office during income tax season, it is nice to have your shows late at my office. I appreciate that very much, JP. Very, very much. I've actually had a chance to meet JP at a tailgate. Very nice guy. Very nice guy. And he's one, I don't know if he's an OG, like very first show, but JP's been with us for a long time. So we appreciate you, man. Very, very much. Very, very much. So
JP, man, one of my best friends is a tax accountant, and I know how long those nights are. So hang in there, man. Hang in there.
We got ours turned around in like 24 hours because we got it in so early.
There we go.
So I was very happy about that. Yeah. I got that okay if you don't owe any more money.
I know our man JP Buellsfeld's counting down the minutes until April 16th. I can guarantee you that.
Yep.
So, well, look, guys, really fun show today. Really awesome submissions. I mean, we have really, really good conversations today. Brian and Sean will be back on Monday to do the RTCF show. And then Brian and I will be back Tuesday at 1:00 to continue more and more off-season talk. But in the meantime, we're going to be cranking out content as always. You can find everything on the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. But hey, listen, folks, before you head out of here, please be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family and any other fellow tax accountants that might need our help getting through this long and grueling tax season.
Yes, that's really the reason we've done all these 4-hour shows. Yes, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Yes.
Whatever platform you watch us on, please be sure to leave us a 5-star review, whether that be on Spotify Podcasts or Apple Podcasts. We greatly appreciate it. But for Brian, I'm Trevor. We will see you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.